Good morning, everybody. We're going to call to order the meeting of October 15th, 2025 of the Montecito Planning Commission. Can we have the roll call, please? No, let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. That's right. Please rise. And begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if we could have our TV coverage announcement, please.
Yes. Our TV coverage announcement, Montecito Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 1 p.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez, Santa Maria, and Orca areas. Rebroadcast of today's Montecito Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 10 a.m. and Sunday at 7 a.m. on CSB TV Channel 20. The hearing will also be streamed live on CSB TV's website and digitally archived and on the county's YouTube channel as well.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. And if you would conduct the roll call, please.
Absolutely. Commissioner Kupiec? Here. Commissioner Kearns?
Present.
Chair Americano?
Here.
And Commissioner Marshall?
Present.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is the agenda status report from the Commission Secretary.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Commission. We have one item on our standard agenda, which is the streamlining and housing accommodation amendments that are presented by Mr. Ben Singer from the Long Range Planning Division, and he's here and ready to present on that. I can move to the projection report, Mr. Chair, if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Our next scheduled hearing will be on November 19th, and then on that agenda we have scheduled the 2025 General Zoning Ordinance Amendment Package by the Long Range Planning Division as well. That's the only item on that agenda. And then moving into the end of the year, December 17th will be the last hearing of the year. And we have one item on that agenda as of right now, which is a sports court modification. And that will conclude our hearings for this year. And then I think at some point we will provide information on our annual Planning Commission holiday gathering. And that will probably be at the next hearing. We'll provide that information.
Very good. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Public comment period is set aside to allow public testimony on items not on today's agenda. The time allocated to each speaker will be set at the discretion of the chair. Total time allocated for public comment is 15 minutes. When testifying before the Montecito Planning Commission, personal attacks and other disruptive behavior are not appropriate. Do we have any speaker slips or requests for public comment over the internet?
Chair Americano, we have received no letters and we have no requests to speak for public comment.
All right. The public comment period is closed. Planning Commissioner informational reports. Individual commissioners may present brief reports on planning issues such as seminars, meetings, and literature that would be of interest to the public and/or the commission as a whole. Do any of the commissioners have any reports to present?
I do not. I have a brief report regarding the Montecito Association meeting yesterday, whereby the information that fiber optics were being laid in the Montecito community by Frontier was just brought up as an informational item, and apparently the Montecito Association did not know. But I guess we are going to have an option in our internet service and, potential better coverage in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any others?
Last year, I was conflicted out on the subject of the Miramar project because of my attendance at All Saints. And so where that is relevant is that All Saints is celebrating its 125th anniversary on Saturday, November 1st. All Saints Day, among other things, and wanted me to extend an invitation to all planning commissioners to come celebrate a Montecito institution.
Very good. That's very kind. Thank you. Any other reports? All right.
That invitation extended to staff as well. I'm sorry, it was not don't mean to imply it was merely commissioners. Yeah.
All right, item 9 on the agenda are the minutes of September 17th and September 24th. Are there any comments or corrections to the minutes which were distributed to the commissioners in advance of the meeting?
No.
None? All right.
None.
Motion would be in order to approve the minutes of September 17th and September 24th, 2025.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any debate? All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? The minutes of both of those meetings are approved. Item 10, Director's Report and Board of Supervisors Hearing Summary. We are pleased to welcome the Director of Planning and Development here this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, members of the commission. Mr. Chair, I actually just want to check one thing. I can't remember the last time I was before you. It's been a while.
Well, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, too. I have just a few things to report. I don't think I reported to you on the grand jury report that came out regarding housing. We went to the board in September to respond to that grand jury report, and that report was produced for the county and all cities on the South Coast, and it had to do with housing, providing housing, affordability issues, and had recommendations on ways for us to improve the climate for housing to be constructed. And so we prepared a response to that. We took it to the board in September. We acknowledge the housing crisis that we face on the South Coast, and felt that we were doing most of the things that the grand jury had recommended already, either because the state had mandated it or it was something the county had voluntarily committed to doing. So we don't have any changes that came out of it, but you're more than welcome to get a copy of that response if you're interested in it or looking at the grand jury report. They acknowledge, like we all do, that we have issues that we need to deal with. Question?
Very good. No.
Okay.
Any questions from the members of the commission?
How would we get a copy of the report?
I can make sure you get a copy of it. I can get you a copy of the report and our response to the report.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like one as well.
Okay.
I'm curious, to the extent that presumably the solution to the problem as identified is greater supply, is the Montecito Planning District seen as a piece or a component of addressing those concerns? Like, is there I'm going to be presumptuous here, but that the solution is a dialing of either density or approvals or something to, I assume the solution isn't to get rid of people, but to add more housing,
Yes.
to bring supply and demand into balance.
We haven't gotten to the point where we're getting rid of people.
so,
We're looking at housing supply. And
Oh, okay. Well, I did not intend to be political with that remark. I apologize. But is there a function or a place in which our jurisdiction should be understood to be involved in the solutions around the concern of the need for greater supply?
Sure. So I think the question really is the Montecito Planning Commission going to be involved in the solution to that? And sometimes yes, and sometimes no. But Montecito is part of the South Coast housing market area. We have an affordable housing project at Miramar. There may be other housing projects that come through at some point in the future. If they're considered affordable projects, those projects are heard by the County Planning Commission just because of the county-wide importance of those. But there may be projects that come to the commission that, I mean, I just can't predict what it would be at this point in time, but it's possible. But yeah, I mean, Montecito is in the housing market area and contributes towards meeting our RENA allocation.
So the lens of addressing the grand jury report could also be seen as the lens of the RENA process. Is that, are these two things the same, or are they different
No.
but related?
Yeah,
I'm not, this is a very open-ended question of
Sure.
educating me. Yeah.
Sure, Commissioner Miller through the chair. So they are not one and the same. They're not, I mean, they're not that connected. They're connected in that they both relate to housing, but one is more or less talking about our process, the grand jury report, each jurisdiction's process, and a way to remove barriers in the process to get housing approved, which then ultimately meets the objective of RENA, but so they're tangentially related, but they're different.
Okay, no, and I appreciate explaining it. And I am curious, having not reviewed it, and obviously you'll send it out to us, are we as a body or an institution kind of understood to be perhaps one of these like barriers, in that we are a deliberative and thoughtful group, but we are not necessarily known for our like expediency, or if the solution is to go with a more ministerial and less deliberative approach to try and streamline housing, I could see a scenario where my august colleagues and I are seen as more problem than solution.
Commissioner Miller through the chair, the state has indicated that when we rezone properties under our housing element, as long as they're 20 units per acre or more, or 20% affordable or more, they are ministerial. So the state views the review process as a potential barrier because historically, jurisdictions will take 2 years to get a project approved or something along those lines. So because of the discretionary steps in the process, the appeals, all those things can really slow something down. And so they have mandated that certain projects are ministerial.
Okay, and to be clear, I was not suggesting that you individually were viewing us as a barrier, but that the direction of legislation and the grand jury's findings along those lines would suggest that perhaps the Montecito Planning Commission's role is not as great in the housing element as perhaps it once was. Is that?
Commissioner Miller through the chair, the Montecito Planning Commission hasn't really played a role in the housing element because that's a county-wide element, and that responsibility lies with the County Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. In a similar vein, we had recommended some rezones of properties in the coastal zone as part of our housing element. That has been working its way through the California Coastal Commission process. We are going to be going in November for action on that. And so hopefully we will get those rezones approved. We had 3 in the Carpinteria Valley and 1 in Isla Vista. So everything else was inland. So that'll be in November, and then we'll hopefully come back to the board as quickly as possible to get those finally adopted. And just a note, we had the APA conference was 2 weeks ago up in Monterey. Those conferences provide opportunities for planning commissioners to attend, so in the future we can keep you apprised of that. They have special sessions for planning commissioners. I think they're very well-attended conferences, and my staff goes and learns a lot, is rejuvenated. We learn what other jurisdictions are doing. So that was it's a really positive thing. So if you're interested in the future, you can let me know. Also, the Planning Commissioner Association across the state has its own conference. And that is at the end of October, the 24th and 25th. It's this year in Tulare County, so kind of far away, but it's another opportunity for commissioners to just learn more about their role and what other commissioners are doing and what they're experiencing in their jurisdictions. And then lastly, just future board items. We have the modifications to a cannabis ordinance. So last March, the Board of Supervisors adopted amendments to the cannabis ordinance to require odor control in the greenhouses in the Carpinteria Valley, either carbon scrubbers or catalytic oxidizers, those types of things to actually try and remove the odor before they vent their greenhouses. And the Coastal Commission made a couple of modifications to that ordinance, and that's going to be heard by the board on the 21st of October. We also have a couple of items coming before the board on oil and gas.
Just one,
yeah.
as far as the cannabis ordinance,
Yeah.
is it retroactive or is it for new permits?
Commissioner Kupiak, through the chair, it applies to all grows in the Carpinteria Valley. So anybody that's growing today in the greenhouses is going to have those implemented by March 18th, 2026.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it will improve things. So regarding the oil and gas items, the board has asked for a briefing on idle and orphan wells that exist in the county. And so we're going to provide a briefing to them just on the status of things. We have had some orphan wells in the county because we had an oil company go bankrupt, and they essentially walk away from those wells, and then the state, CalGEM, is responsible for plugging those wells, formally abandoning them and plugging them. And they had the state has carried out their first phase of abandonment in our county, and I think plugged about 180 wells that were here, and they do it by risk. So the highest risk wells get plugged first, and they just work through the state in each jurisdiction and plug where they find the highest risk wells. So that sort of sets a context for the next item, which is an item that the board will be giving direction to staff on. And a couple of months ago, they entertained the idea of essentially phasing out all oil and gas operations in the county of Santa Barbara. And we will be going back with a possible framework for how the board might do that. There was a state law that was passed, I don't know, maybe it was 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, can't remember. But it essentially gave local jurisdictions the ability to take these steps to amortize out these facilities. So we've seen it happen in Culver City, the city of LA, and the county of LA are all moving in that direction. So what will have to happen is there'll be an amortization study that assesses whether or not their expectations, their investment-backed expectations have been met. And if they have not, they set a time frame when we expect them to have been met, and then those facilities would then be shuttered. That includes wells, any processing facilities, anything along those lines. So the board's going to hear that on the 21st as well. And then in November, we have our standard, every 3 year, we do a building code update because the state updates the California Building Code, and so we're going to take that to the board. And then another sort of controversial item related to oil and gas has been the transfer of ownership of the oil and gas facilities that had been owned by Exxon at the San Ynez unit, the Popco gas facility, and the San Ynez unit, which is on the Gaviota coast, which accepts gas from their platforms, oil from the platforms. And then Exxon had sold that to a company called Sable. And the county has provisions in the code, our petroleum code, for the county to approve the transfer of that ownership. And that has been sort of stuck in limbo for some time. It was approved by the Planning Commission, got stuck at the board for a 2-2 vote because we had a commissioner that recused themselves. And then it's been in court, and now it's been remanded back to the board. And the board is going to be looking at that and considering it on the 4th of November. We have an overhaul of our fee ordinance for planning and development that's going in December. In 2017, this department essentially was directed by the board to become primarily a cost recovery unit, meaning our fees would cover the bulk of our costs, except for our long-range planning division, which is funded by the general fund. We do get some general fund money for the other divisions in planning and development, for like enforcement, public counter, and appeals, those types of things. So, but we're overhauling that, and that's going to be going in December. And then there's an appeal of a housing project in Isla Vista that's going to be heard on the 9th of December. And that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the director?
Yes, I have a couple questions.
Please.
On the briefing on the idle and orphan wells, do you have the number of idle and orphan wells in our county yet, or that's to be determined?
I do have the number, Commissioner Kearns, through the chair, but my memory is going to be failing me. I think it's around 300.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then secondly, has the phase out of all the oil and gas through amortization?
Wait, excuse me. We have more idle wells than that. We have around 300 orphan wells. We have a couple of thousand idle wells, and they're defined differently. The CalGEM defines it one way, and that we define it another way. But if it's been, a lot of oil and gas companies will idle their wells for a year, and then they'll come back and they'll start pumping again. So we say you're idle if you haven't been using it for 6 months. CalGEM says you're idle if you haven't been using it for 2 years. So we have a couple thousand, I think, of those.
Thank you for the clarification. On the phase out, is there an economic study or any kind of information that's going to go along with the report to the Board of Supervisors?
I'm sorry, could you say the first part?
Is there an economic related study that will be presented if all the oil and gas is phased out in the county? Is that a consideration?
Commissioner Kearns, through the chair, I think the economic analysis will be part of the amortization study, and then the impact to the county if those facilities are shuttered, because they do provide income to the county. So yeah, that will be assessed.
And then will the county be looking for probably looking for other ways to make up that income?
I would expect they would.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? No? No? Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
All right. We are at item 11, the standard agenda, item number 1.
Okay, I will read item 1 into the record. Streamlining Housing Accommodation Amendment, hearing on the request of Planning and Development Department to consider the following: case number 25 ORD-00007 and case number 25 ORD-00008, and to determine the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to state CEQA guidelines sections 15061B3, 15168 section C, and 15265.
Okay. Who will be presenting these report for staff? Mr. Tuttle?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Alex Tuttle with Long Range Planning. With me today, we have Ben Singer on my staff as the project manager, and then we have our consultant, Martha Miller, who will be providing the bulk of the presentation. She is participating remotely, so she'll be presenting via Zoom. Just as a refresher, we were here a few weeks ago for that special public workshop in this same room, where we provided a fairly high-level overview of this package of amendments. and we'll be providing a sort of a refresher course on the package today in our presentation, as well as try to hone in on some additional information based on some comments and questions that we heard during the public workshops, both from your commission as well as the County Planning Commission. And then certainly we're happy to answer any further questions. Hopefully in the last few weeks, perhaps you've had opportunity to dive in a little deeper based on what you heard at the workshop. But certainly if we understand it is a very large, robust package, and if there's anything you need us to dig into a little further, we're happy to do that.
Very good.
So with that, I will pass it over to our consultant, Martha Miller.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair and Commissioners. It's good to be back before you today on the ordinance streamlining and housing accommodation amendments. So the amendments overall kind of cover two categories. They consist of amendments implementing housing element programs to revise development standards to enable the achievement of allowed densities and to modernize the multifamily and commercial zone standards. And the second category is process improvement related amendments to simplify permit review processes without compromising the outcome. Standardizing language, standardizing procedures, removing redundancies and outdated standards. Overall, kind of streamlining processes by making the code easier to use and understand and having it clear what the requirements and what the processes are. So as Alex mentioned, I'll give a complete summary of the amendments, recapping what was presented at the study session and expanding on a couple items in response to what we've heard at the study session. So first, I'll describe the amendments related to housing accommodation. And again, these are amendments to implement housing element programs to revise the development standards, to enable achievement of allowed densities, and to modernize the multifamily and commercial zone standards. They include amendment to a number of district development regulations, and I'll go through a summary of each one. I'm going to highlight the substantive changes. There's also a number of amendments related to standardization and simplification of standards and removal of redundancies or obsolete requirements. So there's a lot of cleanup, which is why one of the reasons why the volume of amendments is so great. But again, I'm going to highlight the substantive changes. So beginning with the residential zones, the DR and PRD zones. So these two zones accommodate a wide range of development densities, anywhere from 0.1 units per acre all the way up to 40 units per acre, depending on location. So the primary zones throughout the county for multi-unit residential development are the DR and PRD zones that allow densities of 20 units per acre or more. So there aren't any of these areas actually in Montecito that allow those amount of densities. Also in Montecito, all of the DR and PRD zones that are there are already developed. There are some DR zones that allow 20 units per acre or more in the coastal zone. And the director kind of alluded to these in the director's report about they're now part of the housing element rezone sites and under consideration at the Coastal Commission. So again, generally, the DR zones have density allowances, depending on location, anywhere from 0.1 unit or 0.1 unit per acre to 40 units per acre. The current development standards for these zones really reflect the lower density development pattern. And that kind of makes sense because up until your housing element rezones, that kind of made up 99.5% of the areas, those lower densities. However, with the rezoning of certain properties for those higher densities, the standards don't really match that development pattern and can be a barrier to achieving those allowed densities. So overall with these zones, simplifying and standardizing language and then also essentially creating two sets of standards that apply based on density. For areas that have allowed densities of less than 20 units per acre, which is more of a detached product type, those standards to the vast majority of the standards, to a large extent, for those areas will stay the same. And then there's the standards that apply to areas that allow 20 units per acre or more. Again, do not apply in Montecito, are applicable to some properties in the coastal zone. These are proposed to be amended, including reducing the required minimum front setback from 20 feet to 10 feet and increasing the allowable height from 35 feet to 45 feet to get a little more room in that development envelope to accommodate those the additional density. Overall, the limitation on site coverage right now, that's 30%, is proposed to be removed. It's kind of a redundant standard in that the application of other standards, including parking requirements, open space requirements, setback requirements, all serve to limit site coverage. And then the approach to open space is also proposed to be changed really from a requirement based on a percentage of site to a minimum amount per unit, differentiated based on allowable density. So I'll go into more detail on that, but first I want to show the location of some of these zones in Montecito. So here's the overall zoning map of Montecito, and you can see the light and kind of medium yellow areas make up the vast majority of the zoning area in Montecito, and those are one-family residential zones. A little bit darker yellow is a two-family residential zone, where the DR and PRD zones are the orange and the brown locations. Again, these areas are all developed. The next slide shows the location of the DR zones and the number indications after that you'll see on the next slide show the maximum densities that are allowed. So you can see they're all less than that 20 units per acre metric. So for the DR zones in Montecito, there's very little change in the standards. The next slide will start to show areas that are zoned for 20 units per acre or more. And again, these are the ones in the coastal zone.
Ms.
So the
Miller,
next-
if we have a question from the commission.
Oh,
Sorry.
sure.
So would you prefer to take questions as you're proceeding through your presentation, or would you rather we waited until the end of your presentation and hit you all at once?
Whichever you prefer, I'm happy to accommodate.
All right, why don't we take the questions as they come up so that we stay on subject as best we can. Commissioner Miller.
Kind of interesting where I feel like amateurs are providing oversight to professionals. So the result of this is sometimes remedial education by you of me. So let me preface my question in that regard. We talk about the single-family residence of E1 and R1, and then the two-family residence of R2, but that these are distinctions separate and apart from the implementation of ADUs, or, I'm sorry, is it SB 10, where like there's like lot and house mitosis that seems to happen randomly?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, let me answer that. Yeah, ADUs are allowed in pretty much in all residential zones, and it doesn't count as density. So being in a R1 or E1 residential zone, you can have your ADU or ADUs potentially, and still it doesn't affect the zoning for that property. Same with SB 9.
SB 9,
which
not SB 10, thank
which
you.
allows the two primary dwelling units on a single family zoned lot.
So how do we, I'm sorry, I'm just wanting to fit these puzzle pieces together with the R2. Is R2...
R2, by its zoning, allows for two primary dwelling units as a matter of right.
And so then would that be also 2 ADUs? I'm just wanting to understand how these things
Sure,
stack or don't.
There is an allowance for ADUs on sites that have multiple dwelling units. So there's sort of a calculation or ratio that happens where depending on how many units are on the property, you can have a certain number of ADUs on that same property if you meet all the criteria.
And so is SB 9 separate and exclusive from R2, or by zoning R2, does it then turn into, does SB 9 create a 4-unit?
SB 9 is applicable to single-family dwelling zones. So you wouldn't apply an SB 9 in an R2 zone district because it already allows for multiple units. Essentially, what SB 9 has done is, one way of looking at it, is created a de facto R2 zoning throughout the county, or throughout the state, essentially.
And so once again, I appreciate your indulgence in the kind of the remedial education here for me, but we are revising the zoning of R1 here in R2, but in a farmer math kind of way, everything on here is R2 if we overlay SB 9? Is that the right way to think about that?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, well, just one point of clarification. Our focus really with this, the zoning amendments is on the DR and the PRD zones, not the R1, E1 zones.
Fair enough. Okay,
The only changes in the R1 and E1 are some clarifications, some simplification of existing standards. So so that answers perhaps part of your question. SB 9, that's not really being touched as part of this effort. That was an amendment package that went through earlier in the year. That does have the effect of allowing multiple dwelling units across all single-family zones, but what we're focused on here is really the multifamily zones, the DR, where you can have up to 20 units or 40 units and beyond.
So would it be accurate to, my understanding is what you're doing is kind of streamlining, taking into account state law, and kind of making it so it's all one document. It's the next time we all get together and do this in a couple of years, is it likely that we would see SB 9 being incorporated into the R1 function, and that
Commissioner Miller, through the chair,
is that,
we already
am I
took,
understanding the process correctly? Yeah.
not exactly. We already took forward a package, as I said, nearly about 9 months ago, that updated our ordinance to accommodate SB 9 provisions. So that's said and done. Someone can come in right now and apply for 2-unit development on a single-family zone. It's a standalone section of our zoning code. Nothing we're doing today or as part of this package or a future package would try to merge them. It's a separate program.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Ms. Miller, you're back on.
So if we move to the next slide, we'll show the areas, start to show the areas in the coastal zone that are part of the housing element rezone sites that have allowed densities of 20 units per acre or more. So there's a couple of sites in Isla Vista, and then on the next slide around Carpinteria. So all of these areas they're either developed, they're part of the housing element rezones, and or have a project pending. So if we go back to the open space standard, so currently 40% of the site is required to be an open space, which again is reflective of lower density development patterns. It's also kind of this outdated approach that grouped multiple objectives, amenity space, environmental protection, aesthetic compatibility into one standard, and wasn't really successful at fulfilling kind of any of them directly. So the approach for open space is amended to simplify the standards, focus on open space requirement as an amenity space. Other standards, requirements, regulations address other objectives such as environmental protection, landscaping, setback requirements. So the requirement is rather than 40% in net site area for areas that allow densities less than 20 units per acre, a requirement of 200 square feet per unit. Again, in these areas, they'll have more of a detached development product. So the open space is in kind of by default of that development pattern, open space is achieved. For areas that allow densities of 20 units per acre or more, where you're getting into more of that multifamily or attached product, the requirement is 60 square feet per unit. A minimum of 25% of that must be provided as common open space. And again, this is really going to apply in the coastal zone. There's also design requirements to qualify as that, counting towards open space. It must be usable, accessible, meet minimum dimension requirements, whereas right now, anything that's not covered by a structure, paving, counts towards open space. So the next slide just shows kind of an example of just a simple example development. The middle illustration shows under today's standard what would qualify as open space. And then the next to that is open space that would qualify towards the proposed, what's proposed in the amendments. So that meets those design criteria. That's not to say that the rest of the site then is covered by development and paving. There's still requirements for landscape setbacks, environmental protection policies and regulations and requirements, and building separation. So as we move into the other zones, amendments are to simplify the standards, standardize, make them easier to use and understand, and modernize the standards to facilitate housing in commercial zones where consistent with the housing element update. So first is neighborhood commercial, or the CN zone. There is one location in Montecito with this zoning. It's Montecito Village. Generally speaking, throughout the county, this zoning district is applied, typically includes neighborhoods serving or smaller scale commercial areas near residential or near other developed areas. So overall, standardizing, simplifying language, again, amendments to modernize the standards in this zone include revising the residential density metric that's used. Right now, it's kind of an odd standard, an odd allowance of 2 bedrooms per 1,000 square feet of commercial development. Instead, using a more common metric for density of 20 units per acre. Also reducing the required minimum front setback from 20 feet to 10 feet to accommodate that development pattern of commercial along the street frontage. Removing the site coverage limitation. Again, the application of other standards, parking, setbacks, so on, really serve to limit the amount of site coverage that's available. And then there's also a new requirement for the location of non-residential and residential development. Right now, there's no specific requirement. It's just that residential is only allowed as part of mixed-use development. The proposed amendments include a statement that non-residential must be located along the street frontage, and then residential development, if there is any, may be located either on upper stories or behind that non-residential use along the street frontage. And that's intended to retain that ground floor commercial street frontage. The C1 zone
I have a
is
question. I'm sorry.
Yep.
So this would be the highest density housing, even though it's not, even though it's zone neighborhood commercial, but it would allow for the highest density housing in Montecito at 20 units. And were it residential, it would be DR 20, correct? Understanding that it's not. So,
right, DR 20 would allow 20 units per acre.
Well, yeah, but that, am I correct that there is not a, as being proposed here or discussed, there's not a height limitation on that in the CN the way there is in DR 20? Or is that just a regulation that's not being touched, so we're not seeing it here?
Correct. It's not being touched. It remains.
And what is that number?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, I believe it's 35 feet. The current requirement
For
for height
CN.
in the CN zone is 35 feet.
Okay. Thank you.
You have other questions?
No.
Okay. Ms. Miller?
Okay. So the C1 zone is similar to the CN zone, except this has a unique allowance for single-family residential as a primary use if there's no commercial on the site. There are no C1 areas in Montecito. There are 2 in the coastal zone, including Summerland along Lily and the Santa Claus Lane area. So similar to the C1 zone, the amendments are to kind of use a different metric for allowed residential density. Again, moving from 2 bedrooms per 1,000 square feet of commercial development to a more commonly used metric of 20 units per acre, reducing the minimum required from front setback from 15 feet to 0, accommodating a development pattern of commercial along the street frontage, and then also incorporating that location requirement where non-residential is required to be located along the street frontage, and then residential, if incorporated, must be on the upper stories or behind that non-residential use, again, to retain that ground floor commercial street frontage. Of course, that standard doesn't apply in the case where that single-family residential as a primary use is allowed. The C2 zone is the next commercial zone. There is the one location in coastal Montecito. We discussed this a little bit at the study session, essentially the parking lot for the CVS in the city. There's also a C2 area in the coastal zone in Isla Vista. Other areas throughout the county outside Montecito or the coastal zone, typically these are community scale commercial properties and centers. Here, we're also using a different density metric, moving away from the 2 bedrooms per 1,000 square feet commercial development to units per acre metric, 30 units per acre, reflecting kind of the scale of and development pattern of these areas. The standards are also a little different, incorporating or there's already a requirement that of the amount of residential versus non-residential uses on a site. Right now, residential uses may not exceed 50% of the total gross floor area of the development. Amending that to allow to instead have residential may not exceed 75% of the total gross floor area. This is intended to provide flexibility for mixed-use development while still retaining commercial development. Also, amendment for an additional allowance for maximum height, going from 35 feet, we're allowing up to 45 feet for mixed-use development located more than 50 feet from a residential zone. Otherwise, the maximum height stays at 35 feet. And this is, again, accommodate mixed-use development while also addressing compatibility issues or concerns.
Question on this one. Is commercial parking considered non-residential usage? So that in a scenario where someone bought this lot and kept the ground floor as parking for CVS, but decided to build 35 feet above it, would the parking function meet this 75% requirement, or is not the appropriate understanding of this?
No, parking would not be considered a non-residential use.
To be clear, I'm not suggesting parking for the residential function, but parking for the commercial function, but that still applies. Is that?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, it's the 75% max is from a gross floor area perspective. So while parking may be supportive of a commercial use, it doesn't take up floor area per se. So it's really structural development, buildings that would count towards that 25% or 75%.
But in my thing, I'm wildly imagining here, if it's the ground floor of a multi-store building, and so it's not outside, so to speak, but like ground, if we went across the street and someone stuck apartments on top of the parking complex across the street here, where it's parking, but inside parking, for lack of a better, still no, okay.
I don't think so.
Okay, excellent. And then to confirm that 50 feet from a lower residential zone, this is backing up to R2. Is it lot line to lot line? And so this would be understood to be the 35, not the 45?
Correct.
Okay.
All right, Ms. Miller?
So finally, the professional institutional zone, there is one location of this in the coastal zone. Typically, these are educational, institutional, government kind of facilities, other public facilities. This overall, again, standardizing, simplifying language, modernizing the standards, primarily the residential density standard. Again, your current standard is 2 bedrooms per 1,000 square feet of commercial development. Proposing to revise this to be 1 unit per 1,000 square feet of commercial development, using a common metric, but also recognizing that these would really be unique residential developments if they were to occur again in this zone. So just moving towards a more commonly used metric from bedrooms to unit. So the second category of amendments are those related to the process improvements. And again, these are amendments throughout the code, simplifying the permit review process without compromising the outcome, standardizing language, standardizing procedures, removing redundancies, not changing practical practice, but making the code easier to use, understand what the procedures are, what the requirements are, what that process is. So similar to approach with the housing amendments, I'll give a complete summary of the amendments, recapping the study session, and then expanding on a couple of items in response to the study session. At the end, we have some summary tables to highlight some of the changes. So first, there's a number of sections that are proposed to be deleted because they're obsolete, redundant, relocated to another part of the code, or otherwise no longer applicable. So for example, stormwater runoff requirements are addressed by other regulations. Outside of the code, design compatibility standards are duplicative of land use element policies. Small animal provisions were moved into the tables. COVID-related provisions have expired, so they're removed. So this is a lot of cleanup with the deleted sections. So those are the sections that are deleted. There's also other standards that are revised to carry forward the existing requirements, but make them easier to use and understand. So landscaping, parking and loading, deleting redundant language, consolidating like provisions, reorganizing them. If you look at these sections, there's a lot of kind of red line and moving around. But again, they're carrying forward the existing standards, just clarifying applicability and reorganizing them to make them more digestible and easy to use and follow. For home occupations, there's some revisions or clarification in this for the allowed location of home occupations, that they may be operated within any enclosed primary or accessory structure, and then also incorporating recent amendments that were made with the LUDC, incorporating those into the MLUDC and the coastal zone ordinance. So making those same changes that were recently adopted. There's other miscellaneous text edits throughout the code. Again, there's a number of these, really simplifying the process, standardizing language. One example is in many of your zones, or in some of your zones, the required front setback has two standards for it. It's a certain amount from the property line or a certain amount from the center line of the street, whichever is greater. So anytime someone goes to figure out what their front setback is, you're going through these two calculations, figuring out where the center line of the street is, figuring out where the property line is, doing these measurements, figuring out which results in the greater. The vast majority of the time, it is the setback from the property line that is that requirement. In times where it's the center line, typically that's not a substantial change in the effective development pattern that occurs. So getting rid of the requirement for doing the center line measurement and just having the setback from the property line hold. Again, that's the one that typically applies, the vast majority of the time applies, and is just more straightforward both for staff to administer as well as for people to understand what their required setback is. Another case is the allowances for variable setbacks right now, where the director can, under certain circumstances, allow for some variation in the required setbacks. Some changes I'll talk about later with modifications, or the proposed amendments with modifications, moving that decision down to the director level essentially makes this other process for variable setbacks redundant with what the process would be for going through the modification. So cleaning up kind of that redundant process that will occur as we go through the amendments. So I'll touch on that when we get to modifications as well, and we can expand on that if there's any questions. But getting into amendments to the procedures, beginning with similar use determinations, this is where a use that's not listed in the code, something such as a yoga studio, is determined to be a use that is listed in the code, such as a fitness center. So the amendments proposed reflect the practical application of this process, as these kind of interpretations can happen on a daily basis. So kind of changing the language so that these determinations are allowed to be made in all zones. The decision maker is downshifted from the Planning Commission to the director. The director may defer decision to the Planning Commission, and the director's determination may be appealed to the Planning Commission. Again, codifying kind of the practical application of this practice. The amendments also include a general provision where upon applicant request, the director may refer an application to the Planning Commission for decision, where public interest may be better served by having that going straight to the public or Planning Commission public hearing and action. Minor conditional use permits, these are applicable in the coastal zone, not in Montecito, but incorporate an option for the director to waive a public hearing requirement if, after public notice is given, a hearing is not requested. And that's similar to an option for certain coastal development permits and modifications, where if public notice is given, no concerns are raised, no one requests a hearing, then the director may waive the hearing requirement for that. Development plans, the proposed amendments allow director review of small projects. So zones establish a threshold for development that's subject for when a development plan is subject to director review or Planning Commission review. In some instances, it's where any development, including a small addition, requires approval from the Planning Commission. So the proposal is to allow director review of small projects structures and additions less than 1,000 square feet in all zones. And that's intended to streamline the process, simplify the process for, again, small projects, small structures, small additions. There's also, the amendments also consolidate the preliminary and final development plan, which right now there's the option to process them together. They typically are processed together. So we're just making that having the process, the procedures reflect that. For land use permits and zoning clearances, so both of these both ensure development conforms to the applicable standards and conditions of approval. Land use permits require public notice. The amendments clarify and codify that if a project was subject to development plan or conditional use permit approval, the zoning clearance is the follow-up permit to ensure conformity with that discretionary review. As written now, the code often will say a land use permit or a zoning clearance is required. And in order to figure out which, you have to figure out which one of those it is. And really, about 99.9% of the time, it is the zoning clearance. So we're just stating that out front. And there is an instance where substantial conformity currently requires a land use permit as a follow-up. We have that again in a later slide where the amendments propose to have the zoning clearance as the follow-up to that. So just having the language reflect what is the requirement. For modifications, so modifications are the process to allow consideration of limited modification to certain zone standards, and they're detailed in the code what is eligible for modification. And these are only applicable for projects that are not otherwise subject to conditional use permit or development plan review. So currently these require notice, and in the coastal zone, a hearing before the zoning administrator. In Montecito, a hearing before the Planning Commission. Most of the hearings are waived as requests. They're typically minor and non-controversial. Again, they have to meet the stated requirements in the code. So the amendments as proposed, the decision maker is downshifted to the director. And again, most of the requests are minor in nature. Any modification would be processed concurrently with the land use permit or coastal development permit to improve efficiency and have like multiple, permits for the single project run together. Those would still be subject to design review unless design review is waived by the director under the design review provisions. Variances, just kind of a small amendment at this, unless the conditional use permit or development plan approval is required, it's processed concurrently with a land use permit or coastal development permit. Again, to have approvals or permits related to a single project run together. For design review, there's a couple new exceptions to design review incorporated into the amendments. One for accessory structures that are not visible from public roadways, and then one for detached accessory structures less than 500 square feet that are located either behind another building or on the rear half of the lot. So some exceptions for things that would have minimal or no potential for design implications. Clarifying language for conceptual review and the timing of hearings, and also revising the appeal process. Currently, a single project may be appealed kind of through two redundant processes, one for the development application and then one for the design review. So the amendments propose to eliminate the appeal on the follow-up design review where the associated development application has already been approved. So again, getting rid of that kind of redundant appeal process. For coastal development permits, regarding appealability, so currently coastal development permits are appealable even when the permit is for non-appealable development. And that's something kind of unique with your county, not most jurisdictions. If the development's not appealable, if there's nothing, it's not appealable just by default of needing a coastal development permit. So the proposal is to include a process for coastal development permits, include a non-appealable coastal development permit for, sorry, let me articulate that a little differently. Process coastal development permits for non-appealable development ministerially. So these would be for certain types of identified projects, typically for things where the state has kind of mandates a ministerial review process. So this would be a process for accessory dwelling units, ground-mounted solar installations, certain by right housing projects, again, all located outside of an appeals jurisdiction. So they're not appealable for any other reason. So those would be processed ministerially. Also standardizing expiration dates and time extension for coastal development permits and the associated applications, such as a conditional use permit. So a coastal development process concurrently with a conditional use permit or development plan, they would expire on the same date. We'll talk about expiration dates a little on a future slide. But again, sometimes approvals that apply to a single project currently have different expiration dates. So we're standardizing and having those run together.
Ms.
Also,
Ms. Miller,
yep.
you did a very thoughtful explanation of the appealable, non-appealable development thing. That said, it still kind of went over my head. Could you kind of walk me through an example of how it currently works and how it's proposed to work? Sometimes I learn better by the example rather than by the abstract. Because I have to admit, I'm not entirely getting what you're saying, which is no fault of yours, but mine.
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, I'm happy to give you an example, having both worked in long-range planning and development review for this county. So something you can imagine right now, an accessory dwelling unit is a good example of this. As the process currently is in the inland area, if you applied for an accessory dwelling unit, that is a ministerial process. That's not something that's going to be appealable. So you would come in, you'd get your permit. As long as you're meeting these standards, you get your permit, and you're kind of on your way. Currently in the coastal zone, if you apply for a accessory dwelling unit, even if it is not in an area that makes it appealable to the Coastal Commission, which kind of has its own specific appeals jurisdiction, that accessory dwelling unit would be appealable to the county. So there's kind of two series of types of appeal. You can appeal development to the county, so that's a land use permit, a development plan, any of these things you can appeal kind of county-based. In the coastal zone, in certain areas and certain permit types, you can appeal those to the Coastal Commission as well. We are, as Ms. Miller mentioned, relatively unique in that when things are outside of the Coastal Commission jurisdiction for appeals, we still allow appeals to the county of certain development. Accessory dwelling units are meant to be ministerial. The state has kind of said, these are ministerial, you're not supposed to be able to appeal an accessory dwelling unit. So this is a change to make kind of a class of coastal development permit that matches the inland area to give certain types of projects, you cannot appeal them. So to maybe give one more quick recap of that, accessory dwelling unit, you're applying in the coastal zone. Currently, no matter where you are, that accessory dwelling unit is appealable. It is not supposed to be per the state. So as long as it is outside of that Coastal Commission appeal area, with this change, that would not be an appealable project anymore. Does that answer your question, clarify what this change will be?
So our current language is out of compliance with state law?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, I would be hesitant to say out of compliance with state law, but it does not line up with most of the intent or with what we do in the inland area.
So is there a scenario here where we are in the coastal zone, but someone is trying to appeal an ADU not through the coastal commission methodology, but doing a separate and apart appeal within the coastal zone to the county?
Correct. I believe that's happened.
Oh, Commissioner Miller, through the chair, sort of clarify, within the, within the coastal commission appeals jurisdiction, the appeal still has to work its way through the county before it gets to the coastal commission. So within the coastal commission's jurisdiction, for issuing a CDP, it would first be appealed to the Montecito Planning Commission, then to the Board of Supervisors, and then only then could it be appealed to the Coastal Commission. So that process would still remain for those permits or projects within the appeals jurisdiction of the Coastal Commission. The other areas of the coastal zone outside of that appeals jurisdiction would be just staff level approvals, ministerial approvals that would not be appealable locally to either the commission or to the board.
So for context here, I am the proud builder of a ADU in the coastal zone. It wasn't appealed, so grateful for streamlined processes here on this topic. That said, as I travel around the community, in Montecito, I get a lot of people complaining to me about the lack of appealability of ADUs, understanding that can't be adjusted in the inland zone. But my concern here is that we are eliminating a currently state-allowed function of appeal in the coastal zone to streamline this. I understand this is the intent of state law, but if it's not the explicit statement of state law, I'm wanting to make sure, A, I'm properly understanding it, and two, I'm struggling a little bit with my responsibility to constituency on this topic in terms of things people complain about at coffee shops.
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, the challenges with a project like an ADU is you either meet the standards or you don't. They're very objective, square footage, height, setback. There's no discretion to be applied with an ADU. So it's really a frustrating experience to go through an appeal process of an ADU because either you meet the standards or you don't. There's really no room for, is it compatible with my neighbor? Does it impact their views? Those aren't standards that can be assessed or applied. So the whole appeal process is basically, well, I hesitate to say it, but it's a waste of a lot of people's time and effort and resources because there's really no alternative outcome other than does it meet the standards or does it not?
And I very much track what you were saying. Montecito as a community has not been defined by a desire to not waste time and money on ridiculous appeals. If I had to, we are a community that kind of seems to embrace that as a community feature, but I don't disagree with the logic of what you're saying.
Back up to a little bit to page 25. I understand, as an architect, where we are with ADUs. And I agree that there's a lot of coffee shop discussion that goes on about people's frustration. However, for projects that are not ADUs, where there seems to be on page 25 some discretion about design review, my question is, things come to us on an appeal. Is there any adjustment to the process that goes on for a project to go before the Montecito Board of Architectural Review? There's a 1,000 square foot project or 500 square foot project. It's not an ADU. It's just a building on someone's property that they're building. Is that project subject to Board of Architectural Review or not? Does the development director have the ability to bypass MBAR?
Commissioner Kubiak, through the chair, you mean currently or as proposed?
As proposed.
As proposed, right now in Montecito, well, let me back up. Currently in Montecito, essentially all development, all structural development is subject to design review, regardless of it, if it's a 100-foot accessory structure or
Well, the old code said the movement of a conduit. So all development
Yeah,
goes
all
before
all
MBAR.
structural
Is
development.
that still to be true?
Well, what we've proposed is to add a couple additional new exceptions to that, which are for these small or detached accessory structures.
Well,
So
1,000 square feet on somebody's half-acre lot or acre lot is not necessarily a small structure and has impact on its neighbors, whether it's behind the building, on the side of the building. I'm concerned that we're kind of giving up a review process that, I've sat on MBAR. I mean, I think that those processes help kind of control quality of development. I mean, my opinion is most of those projects that go before MBAR come out the other end as better projects. And I think that is what establishes some level of quality in the community. And I'm concerned that that we diminish that capacity by an exemption.
Commissioner Kupiak, through the chair, and this is an instance where you certainly have discretion, and if this is a proposed change that you're not comfortable with, that can be part of your recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. So there's that.
It will be made.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, this design review issue.
right. Did you want to comment on that? No? I think I do. So I'm looking at the language of these two exceptions. And if the purpose of design review is to ensure that certain standards are maintained for projects that are visible to the public, then the first of these, accessory structures not visible from public roadways, seems consistent with that purpose for design review. If the purpose of design review is to allow a neighbor who may see an accessory structure not visible from a public roadway to have a forum in which to raise his or her objections to that building, that seems to me to be outside the purpose of design review, and therefore this exception to me makes sense. Going to the second one, detached accessory structures less than 500 square feet located behind another building or at the rear half of the lot seems to be what I would call a de minimis exception, meaning it's a very small building, it's less than 500 square feet. It doesn't deserve, in terms of limited public resources, the time and attention of going through design review and appeals because it's such a small building. So, to my mind at least, given the purposes of design review, having those two new exceptions in the code seem to be logical. So I would continue to support them, but I think we may have a further debate on this subject after we finish the presentation and see
I think we will.
see how the commission comes out on that. Ms. Miller, I think you may continue.
Great, thank you. So if we move to development agreements, one more slide. For development agreements, replicating the provisions that are in the LUDC and the Montecito LUDC provisions for development agreements into the coastal zone ordinance, just to make it clear that they apply in the coastal zone. Just clarify that and make that kind of known. For permit expiration and time extension, so currently different approvals have varied expiration dates, anywhere from 1 to 5 years, depending on the permit type. And it's not uncommon to have varied expiration dates for permits all related to a single project. Also, time extensions are routinely granted. Sometimes they require planning commission approval currently. The amendments, as proposed in the amendments, is to establish 4 years as the standard expiration date for planning permits. And this is reflective of current development context, kind of the time, reasonable time that it often takes to go from that permit approval to actually kind of building and executing the project. Alternative time limits may also be established in the individual permit approval. So establishing a standard 4 years as the expiration date for planning permits And then also enabling the director to grant a one-time extension of 2 years without public notice or hearing. These are routinely granted and just simplifying that process. For noticing, consolidating, and wherever possible, standardizing notice requirements for various permits and approvals. Right now, the section kind of lists the noticing procedures for each individual permit or approval type. Many times it says the same thing often, but in slightly different languages, it's just hard to navigate. So just consolidating those and standardizing noticing requirements, not changing the requirements, but just make them easier to navigate and understand what is required.
So, Ms. Miller, can I ask a question, please?
Mhm.
Is there a reason not to continue the current policy of allowing extensions of time beyond a one-time extension for 2 years granted by the director, to allow an extension of time granted by a planning commission so that a project that has a permit but hasn't been able to move forward for some very good reasons doesn't need to go all the way back through the permitting process to have more time to do that which the county originally proposed? And if it turns out that the development standards in the meantime have changed dramatically, or there's some other reasons to say no to building 6 or 8 years after the original permit approval, then the extension can be denied. But why not give both the applicant and the county the ability to pursue a further extension beyond the director granted one of 2 years if there's no good reason to refuse it? That's my question.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, so under current provisions, there's a limit, an upper limit as to how many and for how long an extension can be granted. So the idea with these changes is to push out the typical approval period to that 4-year time frame, potentially longer at the time of approval of a project if a person or applicant anticipates that it could take them some time to go through the building permit phase, for example. They can request and we can consider a longer initial approval period. But the 2-year extension that would get the typical permit up to a total of a 6-year life before it were to expire. That's generally in line with what our current provisions provide in terms of the upper limit for time extensions. One thing that's not mentioned here on the slide is that if a project is approved as part of a subdivision or a map, maps often have a longer life than other permit entitlements. And so if you're permitting a project that has a subdivision or map component, the permit lives on as long as the life of that map would live on. Plus, I think we grant like an extra year just to record your map and then pull necessary permits for the construction component. So we do provide for that. And I think Mr. Singer has some to add.
Yes, Mr. Chair, there's also, in the process for especially larger projects where we might expect to see more delays, something like a conditional use permit or a development plan, in the approval of that permit, that application, we do allow kind of a setting of a timeline. So there's a standard expiration point, but if when working with the applicant, the planning department or the planning commissions, looks at this and says, I don't think you're going to finish this in 4 years, there's the opportunity to set a longer timeline either with a phasing plan or just by setting the kind of expiration time of that. So you may say an applicant comes in and says, we're getting this approved. I think this is going to take 10 years to be fully built out. And then as part of that approval, your commission could say, yes, 10 years is reasonable for that. That will be your expiration for this development plan. And then upon that date, we're 10 years down the line and they say, we're really close, then they would get this kind of one-time 2-year extension because they told you what they needed and then they just need a little bit more. That's the purpose of this, but those larger projects do have the ability to set their own timelines through an approval. And so on top of that, if they have a good reason, we saw this a lot with COVID, a lot of delays, supply line delays, things like that. They could come back. There are processes to amend approvals, either a substantial conformity determination or an amendment that they may be able to come back to either our department or before the commission and say, this 2 years isn't enough. We really need to amend this approval and change this. So there is a process both to set a longer timeline, and then there are processes to change an approval, which could include that timeline that was approved as part of the project.
And that's a good answer to a portion of my question, because you're saying that where the delays are foreseeable at the time the original permit is granted, you can build in some additional flexibility. I'm suggesting that there are circumstances where the delays are not foreseeable and not foreseen, and something comes along that causes a delay beyond the power of the county or of the applicant to deal with it. And it could be an economic change in the world, or the availability of capital, or whatever the reason might be that's not foreseen. And I'm suggesting that if the original approval still makes sense, that the county need not tie its own hands when it comes to allowing more time, where the applicant wants it, the county agrees with it, and there's nobody in the world who's objecting to it, other than the code says, no, you can't do it. And why not build the code to give the county the authority and the flexibility to allow it where the circumstances are appropriate? That's my question, and I suppose it's more in the nature of a point than a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can certainly consider that, and it's certainly something that you can include through your deliberations. I did want to take this moment to go back to the issue of accessory structures and design review. And wanted to clarify something, which I think you might appreciate, Commissioner Kupiak. So as you know, this is a countywide effort. We're here today to focus on Montecito and the coastal zone, but we have other provisions countywide. Upon looking at the actual draft text amendments, that first bullet for accessory structures not visible from public roadways, that's actually only applicable for North County Board of Architectural Review.
Oh.
So it's sort of a unique provision for NBAR, who has a different level of oversight and purview over design review than the other BARs do within the county. So for Montecito, the only relevant change would be that second bullet for the detached accessory structures less than 500 square feet. So I don't know if that fully addresses your concerns, but perhaps gives you a little comfort.
Can we go to the previous page? Because the previous page talks about 1,000 square feet. Am I on the previous page, 23?
Oh, the 1,000 square feet, that's not really a design review issue. That's more of a decision maker for the permit. So that 1,000 square feet is just saying, rather than a small project having to go to the planning commission, the director would be the approval authority, but that does not impact design review beyond for that structure. It would still be subject to the design review provisions of the code.
Just being somewhat egalitarian or not. I mean, I'm very happy that Montecito has some special provision that other bars don't. But I'm kind of curious as to why that's true. But I'm glad that you're clarifying this, because I do think it's an important quality of Montecito. I don't know that other counties, in terms of the composition of their development, I was just kind of like making my own little notes. I mean, we have, Montecito has flag lots, 3 houses built, 4 houses, one behind another. I mean, what's not visible from the road, what somebody does on their rear yard as it opposes the next piece of property that's in a flag lot configuration, or, I mean, there are a lot of tight, I live in the hedgerow. There are all sorts of strange shaped lots everywhere. And I think it's difficult not to have a certain body of review that examines quality of a development. And 1,000 square foot or even a 500 square foot building is a large garage. I mean, it could have a lot of impact on a neighboring property. And I think design review is important and remains part of the benchmark of quality of our community. So I'm happy to hear that somehow we're exempt.
Well, just to clarify, just on that first bullet, not the second.
Meaning,
So going back to that slide,
not the 500 square
not
foot.
the 500 square feet, that would be a countywide change,
Yeah, and I would object to that.
which is certainly within your purview and discretion to do so.
Thank you.
Okay. So it's 10:30. We have a bit more to go, it looks like. And then we're going to have some discussion in the commission. Would the commission like to take a 10-minute break? Or do you want to continue? I'll look around to my colleagues here. Continuing? Bob? Continuing? Marshall?
I'm good either way.
Okay. Staff okay continuing? All right, we'll skip our break and we'll keep going.
Approximately how much more do we have on the presentation side
I
before we
think
get to
3 more
deliveries?
days.
Fair enough. Well, I will.
Commissioner Miller, through the chair,
I
believe there's
apologize. I shouldn't be making jokes like this. Ms. Miller, are you still with us?
Yes. 7 more substantive slides.
7 more slides.
Yes.
Okay, I think we can power through this.
Is it fair to say that the 1,000 square foot exemption will cover pretty much all of the Moody Sisters cottages? That'll be the director's problem and not our problem anymore? Is it fair to say the 1,000-foot exemption will cover all of the Moody Sister cottages so that it gets that out of, it becomes the director's problem and not our problem to address?
Commissioner Miller, the chair, I can't speak to the Moody Sisters projects, but again, this is only in situations where that 1,000 square feet would normally trigger a development plan, which automatically goes to the planning commission. So if it's just a land use permit, which is already staff level, that would stay staff level, still be appealable to your commission.
Okay.
So I don't think you're entirely out of the woods.
Well, I bullet not dodged, understood.
I know this is probably part of conversation, but that's exactly what we don't want to have happen. I want the Moody Sisters cottages to remain under the jurisdiction of a review body that has some professional design sense.
Okay.
I mean, we're one of the few civilized countries that actually has state law that allows a 2-story building to be built without an architect. A developer, a homeowner, can build their own house without any design review. So, when the purple building with the yellow polka dots happens next to your house, I think you'll be rather upset.
Point taken.
All right, we're going to move on and return to some of these items after we finish the presentation. Ms. Miller, you are back on.
Okay, some amendments related or that apply for changes to approved projects. I'll just go through the kind of bullet points. So first, specifying procedures for consideration of minor changes to design review approval, kind of having a standard set of procedures for consideration of minor changes to approvals in general, permits and approvals, including design review in that. Establishing zoning clearances as a follow-up permit to substantial conformity determinations rather than land use permits. So the zoning clearance be used to verify conformity with the approval of substantial conformity. a substantial conformity determination is basically just a determination that refinements or changes to the project are in substantial conformance with that original approval. Also clarifying the time limits for substantial conformity determinations as well as amendments to approved projects, revising the required findings for amendments to approved projects to focus on addressing conformance with applicable plans and consistency with environmental effects of the original approval rather than the current requirement, which is a determination that original findings are still applicable. Consolidating redundant provisions in the coastal zone ordinance, just again, kind of standardizing, consolidating, making them easier to use and navigate. And then refining the guidelines for making determinations if something is a minor change, if something is qualifies for substantial conformity. And these are refining the guidelines to reflect common practice, identifying thresholds, having measurable criteria, and clarifying applicability of when, again, something can be determined as a minor change, when something qualifies for a substantial conformity determination, and then where they don't, then an amendment or a revised project is required.
Just as a question, is there written language about what those thresholds are, how they're defined?
Yeah, so the guidelines, they're appendices, and they list out all the thresholds for making those determinations. Permit lapse and revocation. So the code currently includes language by which some approvals become void and are automatically revoked even after they're exercised. So including when that development or uses allowed by conditional use permits that are discontinued for a period of 12 months are automatically revoked and considered void. And that can't, an approval that's been exercised can't really be revoked without due process, requiring notification, having certain findings, a public process, and opportunity for appeal. So the amendments revise the current language to establish a provision that's really generally applicable to approvals that if the use or structure is discontinued, the county may begin revocation procedures, but is not required to, and the permit is just not automatically revoked. That approval isn't automatically revoked. The county may go through proceedings, again, which would require notice, findings, a public process, and opportunities for appeal. So the amendments establish revocation procedures that are applicable to all permits and approval types, reflecting the current practice for revocation of land use permits and zoning clearances. Overall, the director would be the review authority unless an appeal is filed, or if the director refers that decision to the Planning Commission or Board of Supervisors. So the next series of slides that we have are intended to summarize some of the key provisions, again, that we were asked about during the study sessions. So the first is a summary of proposed changes to review authority. First is the similar use determination. And again, this is where proposed use that is not specifically listed in the code is determined whether or not it's substantially similar to something that is listed. So currently it's technically limited to certain zones, and Planning Commission is the review authority, proposing to expand that to all zones, the director being the review authority. The decision is appealable to the Planning Commission. And again, this is to reflect practical application of this. Next is development plan approval, where currently there's planning approval for any development in certain zones and development over a threshold in all zones. The proposed is to allow for director approval of structures and additions less than 1,000 square feet. That's a change in the review authority for these small projects, and the intention is to enable director review of those small projects. For modifications, again, these are those limited modifications allowed to certain zone district standards for projects that are otherwise not subject, that otherwise don't have a conditional use permit or development plan approval. Currently, in the coastal zone, the review authority is the zoning administrator. In Montecito, it's the planning commission. The proposal is to have that downshifted to the director. Most hearings on modifications are typically waived currently, as the requests are minor and non-controversial in nature. Time extensions of permits and approvals. Currently, the review authority who approved the permit can authorize or is the review authority for time extensions. The proposal is to downshift that to director. Time extensions are routinely granted. And then revocation of permits and approvals. Currently, the decision maker on the revocation is the review authority of the approved permit. The proposal is to downshift that to the director. It still is appealable to the planning commission. And the purpose is to incorporate a standard revocation procedures for all permits and approvals and allow that to have that standard process.
Ms. Miller, may I interrupt you for a moment?
Mhm.
Going back to the second item on this page, development plan approval, you're proposing that the director would have authority to approve development plans for projects less than 1,000 square feet. Do we know of the total population of development plan approvals in the county in any given year? How many of them are small, for 1,000 and under square feet? And it can be a ballpark. I'm just curious as to how much of a workload shift this represents. And it can be a guess.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we could guess, but don't have anything probably close to precision on this one. But I would say it would represent a fairly small percentage of the development plans. Maybe a quarter of the development plans that come through the door are gonna, or less would fall into that 1,000 square foot category.
Okay. Because what I'm wondering is whether or not it makes sense to take the 1,000 square feet and bump it up to 2,000 square feet and make it appealable. In other words, give the director authority for development plan approval over small projects defined as 2,000 square feet and lower, with a provision that allows the decision to be appealed if there's some issue with the neighbors or otherwise. And that way, it shifts more of the work to the director and still allows an avenue for public participation on an appeal.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, and that's certainly within your discretion to include that recommendation. I do want to just clarify that as currently proposed with that 1,000 square foot limit, those decisions would be appealable. So, but your concept of essentially just bumping that figure up to 2,000, in either scenario, they would be appealable.
Okay.
Follow up on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
As I look at page 31, there are 5 items. 2 are listed as appealable and 3 are not. Is that a drafting thing on the slide or?
Yeah, so because the slide was really meant to highlight where there's changes of review authority, the focus wasn't on the opportunities for public input, which is actually the next kind of summary table I'll go through and maybe highlight more of where something's appealable or not.
So,
But just to clarify, on this slide, the only action that would not be appealable would be time extensions.
okay. And is there a logic to that? Like, when we watch Sesame Street, there's like one of these is not like the other. Is there a logic to like why we have that one different than the others?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair. Yeah, so time extensions are generally seen as non-controversial. They don't change a project. And oftentimes an appeal on them is based by the appellants in a dislike for the project, not for the exact timing of the project. But a time extension is saying the project is not changing, the project is the same, you're given an additional 2 years to construct it. So through that, since that doesn't involve any changes to the approval, the specifics of the project, it's really just this time. That is something that we see come in. We've seen it generally be non-controversial, and the controversy based around it is so often based on the project itself that we don't want to give the idea to people who may want to take issue with a project that appealing a time extension could change a project.
And the logic of that, I track. But in the inverse, if the director's decision is a denial, the applicant does not have an appeal to for the extension? I guess that was a little bit more my curiosity was. First of all, am I understanding that is what this would say, or is there a different forum of approval around that?
Commissioner Miller, the chair, we can look at the exact text language, but I guess I'd have a hard time thinking of a situation where we would deny a time extension. Really, the only instance where we've denied time extensions is where someone has not submitted them in a timely manner, like the permit has already appealed and then they come in, or already expired and they're trying to get a time extension sort of after the fact. But otherwise, there's really no provision for denying a time extension. And as indicated on the slide, they are routinely granted without any issue.
Okay. My final question on this slide is that it refers to appealable to the Planning Commission. We have come across times when the language in the county code is such that the appeal is being directed to the County Planning Commission versus the Montecito Planning Commission. For instance, in affordable housing. Should we understand the language of the Planning Commission here to refer to the County Planning Commission, or in cases of our planning district, is it appealable to us?
Or Commissioner Miller, through the chair, I think the provision you're speaking of is codified in a different code section of the county code. It's the Chapter 2 of the county code, which sort of explains the planning authority or planning agency responsible for reviewing different projects, where in Montecito, it's the Montecito Planning Commission is generally the planning agency, but for a certain handful of project types, the County Planning Commission is considered the review authority over ones of more regional matters. And so we're not proposing to change those provisions as part of this. So if there is an instance currently where a project is under the authority, project in Montecito is under the authority of the County Planning Commission, that would continue to be the case with any of these changes.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Miller, back to you.
Okay, so the kind of other area where through the study session, there's a request to kind of summarize certain categories of changes. So this is for summary of proposed changes to public input opportunities. So where there is changes through the amendments for either appealability or notice or so on. So the next couple of slides will go through that summary. Some of them are similar to where there was a proposed change in the review authority. So again, first, the similar use determinations currently require public notice and planning commission hearing for the determination. As proposed, the director would make the determination. The public notice would occur with the associated permit. There would also be public notice and planning commission hearing of the determination if the determination was appealed. And again, that reflects a practical application of the determinations. The next area is for minor conditional use permits. Again, this is in the coastal zone, incorporating that option for waived hearing. Currently, for minor conditional use permits, public notice and zoning administrator hearing is required. By having the option for the waived hearing, there would still be public notice, but the hearing would occur only if one is requested. Again, to reduce processing times and costs for non-controversial projects.
So, Ms. Miller, can I ask a question, please?
Mhm.
What does public notice mean as used here? It used to be that there were notices published in newspapers when there were newspapers. What does it mean today?
Mr. Chair, there are still notices published in newspapers, so far as the newspapers exist. In addition to that, public notices are posted placard notices. So when someone applies for a project that gets noticed, we give them a sign that they put on their lawn that says they're doing something with the planning department, as well as mailed notices to the neighbors. So the difference here is hearing notices are generally those put into newspapers, a display ad like there was for the hearing today, whereas smaller level projects, you'll have the posted notice, the placard notice, as well as the mailed notice. Hearings for one property will kind of get that same, the hearing notice is mailed to the neighbors, but that's kind of the difference between types of notices that we have.
So the only newspapers that I know of that are published regularly are the Independent, that comes out once a week, the Montecito Journal, that comes out, I think, once a week, right? Those are the two papers that, at least in terms of this commission, are the ones that will include those notices, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And when you send notice to the neighbors, is there a standard typically within, I don't know, 300 feet? Anybody who owns a parcel of land, any portion of which is within 300 feet of the exterior boundaries of the project, of the applicant's property, is that still the standard?
That's correct.
Okay. And that's a mailed notice?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. Ms. Kern? Question?
With development plans, as we've talked about, the proposed change in review authority for the allowing director approval for structures and additions less than 1,000 square feet. The director approval would be without a hearing. There is public notice of pending action, and that decision is appealable. So as currently at the Planning Commission hearing, would have public notice. Planning Commission decision would have public notice and a hearing. With the proposal, the director approval would be without a hearing for those, again, qualifying projects. There would be public notice of pending action, and that is appealable. Modifications, again, as we mentioned, these are limited modifications to certain zone district standards. Currently, there's public notice, zoning administrator hearing in the coastal zone, planning commission hearing in Montecito, unless that hearing is waived. As proposed modifications, the review authority would be the director. It'd be without a hearing. There would be public notice of the pending action, and that action is appealable as well. And typically, most hearings are waived currently under the current process. Design review exceptions, we've talked about this. I'll skip over bullet 1 as that doesn't apply, but with the new exception for design review for accessory structures under a certain size located behind a building or on the rear half of the lot, those would be exempt now instead of going through the design review process. Also related to design review, the kind of appeals of design review where the associated development application is already approved. As we mentioned previously in the slides, currently design review that follows the approval of an associated development application may be appealed. As proposed in the amendments design review, the project whose associated development application has been approved may only be appealed if that design is not substantially similar or in substantial conformance with the approved project. So we're getting rid of the redundant appeal processes where essentially the same project can be appealed twice. Time extensions, we mentioned this. Currently, it is the review authority who approved the permit. In some cases, that's the Planning Commission. As proposed, for time extensions, there would be no notice. It would be a director approval and not appealable. And that's really intended to reduce processing time and cost. Time extensions are routinely granted. The follow-up permit for or land use permits and zoning clearances. Again, land use permits and zoning clearances are permits to ensure compliance with standards and conditions of approval. Land use permits require public notice. Zoning clearance do not require public notice. Kind of mentioned before, currently the code identifies that a land use permit kind of may be the follow-up permit to a development plan or conditional use permit. In actuality, this is really the only the case with substantial conformity determinations. So in the amendments, we're proposing just to clearly state that the zoning clearance is the required follow-up permit after development plan or conditional use permit approval, reflecting the standard practice and also that projects have already received public notice and hearing or opportunity for hearing through that previous discretionary permit. And this is just making sure the development is consistent with that approval. Substantial conformity determinations, these are those findings that a minor change to approval is within substantial conformance of the approval. Again, there's guidelines that determine, set the thresholds under which a substantial conformity determination may be made. Currently, the land use permit is the follow-up permit, and there is public notice with land use permits. The proposal is having the zoning clearance be the follow-up permit with no public notice, and that is not appealable. And that's intended to reduce the processing time and cost for items that are consistent with previous approvals that have already gone through the associated public process. And then for revocation of permits and approvals, currently the review authority is the original review authority who approved the permit. And if that original review authority had public notice and hearing, then that revocation would go through that same process. Through the proposed amendments, there would be a notice to the permittee and the property owner, but it would be a director decision. There would be public notice in a planning commission hearing upon appeal should the county go through the revocation process and there be an appeal of the decision. And the purpose is to streamline the process for revocations that aren't challenged if there isn't an issue with going through that process. And that
walk me through, just so I'm thinking about this correctly. There is a permit revocation process, and then there is a time extension process. I appreciate time zero only goes in one direction, but if a permit has expired, does it also need a revocation? Or like there's an interplay there between the if something is not happening, is it? Yeah.
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, an expired permit would not need a revocation. Expired only applies to permits that have not been realized. So if someone applies for a new house, they have a certain amount of time. If that time is gone and they haven't started construction, that permit expires. It was not constructed, it was not kind of begun, so that's the expiration. Revocation is for when the permit has been realized, it's been constructed, the use began, but for whatever reason they are in violation of the conditions or are doing something that otherwise may not be allowed with the use, or we lay out a set of findings that, one of them must be made to revoke it, but expiration is just based on the time before the permit has kind of been begun, either construction or the use in the case when construction isn't necessary.
So the revocation process is for a permitted that has been issued and construction is happening, and this isn't a violation where I come in to build a house this big and suddenly it, I'm violating the terms of the permit. So it's not an enforcement action of failure to comply with the permit. It is a scenario where the permit is being revoked in construction. Am I understanding the scenario you're describing?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, I would say partially it can be due to enforcement actions. It is not necessarily during construction. It may be years down the line when whatever needed to be constructed has been constructed. They've been kind of operating the use for, again, maybe 5, 10 years for all anyone could say for a kind of an imagined scenario, and then they begin to operate it in violation with their approved permit. At that time, if someone submitted a violation, it would begin an enforcement action, and revocation may result from that enforcement action if they do not comply with that and go back to their approval. So if they have conditions that they have to meet and they begin to not meet one of them, our enforcement team may go out and say, you have a violation, you're not meeting this. If they correct it through that process, then nothing more would be needed. They're operating in the bounds of their permit. If they do not correct it, then revocation is an eventual option for what we may do with that permit.
So is this largely in like CUPs of like events and that kind of stuff? It's not in a scenario of like you have an unpermitted extra bedroom. Yeah, and then we're revoking the permit on the house.
Yeah,
I mean, am I?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, I would say it would, well, for one, revocations don't happen a lot, as you can imagine. Trying to take back a prior approval is not the easiest thing to do. I would say largely where it has come up are those CUPs for uses and activities that perhaps there was an approval years ago, and either that use has ceased, and so there's sort of a desire for one reason or another to get it off the books, so it can't be reestablished without going back through that process, permit process. Or there's sort of the repeat offenders where they're continuing to violate the terms of their permit, and we want to go through the process of revocation to kind of put it to rest. That would happen much more likely than, say, someone does an unpermitted addition to their house. Normally in those situations, we just work with the applicant to get a permit. And to resolve the violation through those means, as opposed to attempting to revoke the permit for the house. I've never seen that happen. Yeah.
Fair enough. I'm a lot of what you guys have done, I want to emphasize, makes a lot of sense. Is there a need to streamline the revocation process? Or this seems like it's a seldom adversarial and unpleasant process?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, the primary impetus for changes to the revocation process were to provide for due process, because as was mentioned, their current code has some language that suggests there's situations where a permit can be automatically deemed void and revoked without going through due process, and that's really in conflict with due process provisions. So the primary reason for changing the procedures for revocations was to clarify that there is a process that we need to go through to revoke a permit. There are findings that have to be made. So it can't just be arbitrary. In looking through that and understanding that these don't happen very often, we are sort of one of the consistent themes here is to try to minimize the unnecessary needs to go through a more public hearing process for what might be a fairly straightforward procedure. So starting small at the director level to save the resources and the costs associated with putting on these public hearings and everything that goes on to that goes with that, to have it start at the director level. If there's an issue, if someone, whether the applicant or someone who's in opposition objects to that, then they have the opportunity to appeal. But at least it starts off sort of at that lower level decision making to save everyone time and energy. And
Thank you.
All right. What's next?
All right, I will handle the last couple bits. We're in the home stretch. Thank you to Martha for a very in-depth review of so much of it once again. For kind of getting into the actual approval and actions on this, if we could have those slides back up on the screen, please. Perfect, thank you. For the environmental review of these ordinance amendments, the coastal zoning amendments, which is case 25 ORD 7, can be found exempt from CEQA pursuant to CEQA guidelines sections 15061B3, which is known as the common sense exemption, 15168C, which is for the housing accommodation amendments related to review under the programmatic EIR that the housing element had. And then section 15265, which exempts preparation of a local coastal program. And then the amendments to the Montecito Land Use and Development Code, which is case 25 ORD 8, can similarly be found exempt pursuant to sections 15061B3 and 15168C. The recommended actions for your commission today on the coastal zoning ordinance amendments are to make the required findings and recommend that the County Planning Commission make the required findings and recommend to the board that they make the findings as well. The findings are attachment A of the staff report package. Recommend that the County Planning Commission recommend that the board find the ordinance amendments exempt from CEQA, and then adopt a resolution, which is attachment C, recommending the County Planning Commission recommend the board approve the ordinance amendments. For the MLUDC amendments, the recommended actions are to make the required findings and recommend that the board make the findings, once again, attachment A, recommend that the board find the ordinance amendments exempt from CEQA, and then adopt a resolution, this one attachment D, recommending that the board approve the ordinance amendments. If you're wondering, for the coastal zone, your commission recommends to the County Planning Commission, and then they recommend to the board. For the Montecito Land Use and Development Code, your commission recommends directly to the board, so that's why it's a little bit wordy. That concludes our presentation. We're happy to take any questions, and just to remind you that your recommendations, both to the County Planning Commission and the board, can include changes to the ordinances that you've seen, as we've discussed some of already, and I'm sure we'll discuss more of in the coming minutes. Thank you.
Very good. And thank you to the staff, and thank you to Ms. Miller for that thorough and clear presentation of the proposal before us. We have the detailed findings in the agenda packet that was distributed to the commissioners. Before we take up the issue of suggested revisions from this commission to the board, are there any questions or issues with respect to the findings that we are being asked to make?
I have a procedural question.
A procedural question, go ahead.
Okay, as a procedural question, what is the scenario if the Montecito Planning Commission recommends a change to an item that we're recommending to the county? Do they have to then re-discuss the item and see if they agree to our change? Just procedurally, how does this work if we do have changes?
Commissioner Kearns, through the chair, the County Planning Commission has not met to take an action on this yet. We're meeting with them in 2 weeks, October 29th, so they will receive whatever recommendation you make to them today, and we'll consider that. It is up to them if they want to carry those recommendations forward to the board. They may have different opinions on certain things, but they will, whatever recommendations you make to them on the coastal zoning ordinance, they will receive and consider.
So then they are essentially able to approve or deny a suggested change from the MPC.
For the coastal zone, effectively, yes.
Okay, okay, thank you.
And just to finish that thought, when it comes to suggested changes to the Montecito zoning code, those are recommendations that are going directly to the Board of Supervisors, not through the Countywide Planning Commission. And if we have suggested changes to that ordinance, that will be transmitted by staff directly to the Board of Supervisors when it takes up the proposed changes to the Montecito zoning code. Am I correct about that?
Mr. Chair, you are correct. The Montecito Land Use Development Code, any recommendations you have, those go straight to the board. The County Planning Commission will not hear any recommendations or really any information about the MLUDC.
Okay, that's great. So as we're discussing potential changes, let's be sure to be clear as to whether we're suggesting changes to the coastal zoning ordinance or to the Montecito Land Use and Development Code. So that's, sorry? Or both. Or both.
Correct. You can make the, say you have 5 recommendations, they can be made to both. They may end up at the board in different states
Right.
because one set of them has to go through the County Planning Commission and one set does not.
Okay. So back to my question, are there any changes to the findings that we're being asked to make before we tackle the question of any changes to policy or language of the codes?
Mr. Chair, can we call for public comment before we?
Thank you for the reminder. Yes, we are going to open the floor to public comment on this agenda item. There is no one in the hearing room, so I'm presuming there are no requests to speak, but I'm going to ask our secretary to tell us if anybody wishes to speak.
Correct, Chair Americano. We have nobody in our attendees column, and we have nobody in the room with us, and we have no letters submitted for this item.
All right, then. We're going to close the public hearing and take up the question of any changes to the findings, or barring that, any changes to the proposed revisions for these county codes. And the floor is open to any of the commissioners who wish to make proposals.
Yeah, I want to be painfully clear about this, since there is never the indication of any reference to the Board of Architectural Review or any process like that within this language. In Montecito, what projects will actually go before MBAR? The 1,000 square foot development? The 500 square foot development will not?
Commissioner Kupiec, through the chair. In Montecito, the 1,000 square foot development, speaking for the development plans that's now under the director level, would still go to MBAR.
Right.
The 500 square foot or less development that is behind another structure or on the rear half of a lot would be exempt from Montecito BAR review.
Okay.
There are a number of small existing exemptions from Montecito BAR that this is one we are adding to that list. That list was included in the ordinance package if you wanted to see kind of what is currently not going to them, but this is, the new exemption is just that 500 square feet behind a structure, rear half of the lot.
Got it.
Any other questions or comments? Bob?
No comment for sure, but I thought we would do that in deliberation.
Okay, good. Other questions for the staff?
I want to be clear that the findings are, if to understand this correctly, are that the proposals, as we are seeing here, are in compliance with the laws being changed, or in compliance with. We are finding that these changes to the code are in compliance with the laws that were just referenced. Is that? I guess, let me, as the most amateur of the people on this board, when we are doing findings on individual projects, we're like, yeah, this project, the finding is this project is in compliance with the code. Where I am struggling, and please, Chair Americano, understand, the struggle is mine in terms of, is when we are changing the code, what are we finding? And that we're usually finding that the project is in compliance with it. Does that make sense? If I could have a better understanding of the process of finding.
Commissioner Miller, it's a valid question. Commissioner Miller through the chair. So when doing an ordinance amendment, there's essentially, one is there's a CEQA finding. And in this case, we're finding that the changes are exempt from CEQA. And then there's 3 administrative findings that need to be made. The first is that it's in, and I'm going to be paraphrasing here, but the first is that the changes are sort of in the general community welfare. The second is that the changes are consistent with the comprehensive plan and state and local zoning laws. Some of which are being changed as part of this endeavor, but essentially that one is focused on, is it consistent with the comprehensive plan, which is inclusive of the Montecito community plan? And the point we make in the findings is that this project, we're not changing any policies of the Montecito community plan or the comprehensive plan. So it's all embedded into the zoning code, and the findings indicate that the changes being proposed are consistent with the policies and standards of the community plans. And then the last finding is that it's consistent with good zoning and planning practices, so that it just makes good planning sense and zoning sense to make these changes, to sort of speak at the layman's levels.
This may be a question for county council. Are terms of like good planning practices and community welfare, are these legal terms of art, or are these prudential judgments by us? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Chair and Commissioner Miller, I can't opine on all the terms. It would be something that I would have to research. If it's not defined in the code, then generally it would default to however it's defined in case law or through statutory construction. Am I not answering your question?
That makes sense up until a point, but if I'm understanding, my assignment is that these changes to the county code are in compliance with community welfare. There's a way I could understand that to be like, in my own prudence, what does that mean? But is the term community welfare a defined legal term of art somewhere in like state law that like, for my background as a farmer, it could be either much narrower or much broader than how I am understanding it in a prudential manner. Likewise with good planning practice, I'm wanting to make the findings, but I'm a little worried that I'm not a good finder in this context, if that makes...
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, unless it's defined in the code, we would default to case law. I am not aware immediately off the top of my head of a case that has a specific definition of that. So with strong deference and respect for our county planning staff, where do we derive the need to have findings against those standards? Is that defined in state law that we are? I'm fully supportive of them as intellectual concepts, but the idea that we need to have these changes be in compliance with community welfare. As a citizen, I love it, but I'm just curious as to like, from whence did this spring forth?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, those findings are written in the code. So the code itself provides the findings to change itself. It is We think it's derived from state law. They've been in the code for a very long time. So we would have to double check exactly where they come from state law to be sure of that. But they're not defined terms in the code, especially there's not a definition for community welfare in the code, but those findings are written in a section of the code that say to make changes to this code, it must meet these findings.
And so, Commissioner Miller, through the chair, so if you have the findings in front of you, you know, the language is that we indicate the assertion that it's in the general community welfare, since the amendments will basically streamline, modernize, update, clarify, achieve greater consistency with our process and procedures, revise regulations to facilitate mixed-use development to help address our housing needs, and incorporate changes pursuant to programs of our county's adopted housing element update. And all these go to basically help support efforts of the county to support our communities and address all the issues that they're concerned about, while sort of protecting a lot of the values and characteristics that we hold dear. And just one other factor, which is that you know, counties basically have this general police power construct that allows us to make regulations that we deem to be in the interest of community health, public safety, and welfare. And so all these kind of fall in under that umbrella.
So I very much appreciate the guidance that has been provided, but that we should be understanding this to be that these are the terminology of internal revisions to the county code document that may or may not have a backstory history that is rooted in state law, but certainly rooted in the general policing power of the state delegated to the county. Am I characterizing this correctly? I am cognizant that I am in a room of attorneys and I am not one, so I want to emphasize the degree to which I am deferring to the expertise of others.
I'm prepared to tackle this particular problem if the staff will indulge me on this. State law requires that this county have a general plan and a set of zoning ordinances to carry out the general plan. State law requires that if the zoning ordinance is going to be changed, it needs to be done in a way that is consistent with the general plan. And the decision maker, in this case the Board of Supervisors, needs to ensure that consistency between the general plan and the zoning ordinance. This finding is intended to convey this commission's opinion to the Board of Supervisors that the zoning code changes that have been described in great detail to us today is in fact consistent with the general plan. And the general plan exists at a number of different places in the county legal structure, but we have been advised by staff that it's consistent with the general plan. We have no reason to think that that staff recommendation and opinion is incorrect. And so they are suggesting that we make the finding and convey that finding to the Board of Supervisors that these proposed changes to the zoning code are consistent with the general plan. That's the nature of these findings. The Board of Supervisors is required to make it. We're being asked for our opinion as to whether or not they should do so. And the staff's recommendation is that we should say to the Board of Supervisors, these proposed changes to the zoning code are consistent with the general plan. Whether they are sound land use policy or not is a matter of policy, of debate. And we may well, as a commission, decide that there are certain provisions that have been presented to us today that we think should be revised or tweaked in some fashion by the Board of Supervisors, and where we may include in our recommendation a set of suggested revisions or tweaks to those zoning code provisions. That doesn't change the findings that we're being asked to make. All that means is, in our discretion in approving these changes to the rules, we're suggesting slight changes to those rules, all within the ambit of the zone, of implementing the zoning code and implementing the general plan.
So if I'm going to try and say back to you what I think you just said to me in very thoughtful language, thank you, Chair Americano, that the community welfare could be understood to be compliance with the general plan. The good zoning practices or good planning practices is a prudential judgment about what's effective. There's not some model planning code out there that we are seeking compliance
No.
to. Okay.
That's right. The county has a great deal of discretion with respect to how it decides to run its zoning function and how to regulate land uses. And there are very few specific rules dictated by the state about how that should happen. But one thing the state does say is if you're going to have a general plan, you're going to have a set of zoning ordinances that implement the general plan, and they all ought to be consistent with each other. You shouldn't have inconsistent rules and policies between your general plan and your zoning code. And to ensure consistency, we're going to require that you say so. When you're adopting the zoning code and you're amending the zoning code, you need to say whether or not what you're doing is consistent with the general plan, so that the whole world knows that you're doing something that is consistent with the general plan. That's the purpose of that state law.
And so for our purpose, obviously we have the county general plan.
Mm-hmm.
Should we properly understand the Montecito community plan to be like a mini version of the general plan as applicable to us specifically?
That's exactly
Okay.
what it is.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'm going to ask the staff to tell me what part of that I got wrong.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, it was great.
Okay.
No changes.
Okay. You'll tell me when I wander off the playing field, right? All right, good. All right, assuming there are no other changes to the findings, let's talk about the specific policies and provisions that have been presented and whether or not any of the commissioners would like to suggest changes to those policies or provisions. The floor is open. Mr. Kubiak.
I want to strongly suggest that these revisions to allow the planning director to bypass MBAR review for projects, even of a 500 square foot nature. I mean, a 500 square foot building is 18 by 32 feet long. It could be a number of different things. The usages can be a studio, a cabana, you know. I mean, we have limits in our own code about 850 square feet for a guest house, but that doesn't preclude a 500 square foot guest house. It doesn't preclude a 500 square foot usage of any other kind of property. The other part about this that I'm concerned about is half of Montecito, half of the hedgerow is in the coastal zone. These aren't just, you know, the edge of the property. Half of Lower Montecito is in the coastal zone. They require coastal development permits to do their work. I think the other thing that is kind of hard to see on this map that came up is we have both geography and we have a historical map of non-conforming lots. I mean, we're in a two-acre zone for the most part. We have many half-acre parcels of odd shapes, long and narrow, wide and not narrowed, odd shapes. It's very difficult to apply this, it's in the back of the lot game, or, you know, it's not visible from the road. What if there are 3 or 4 flag lots. These properties are intertwined by driveways, not by the county road. So if you're in the middle, there are times it's even hard to define what is the rear of the building. What's the rear of that lot? And I think all of these developments, especially something as large as a 500 square foot use that could be a variety of different things, I think belongs in the process that we have normally had and having architectural review to maintain the quality of the kinds of structures that get built and also to maintain the idea that we have good neighbor policies. And those all get implemented at that forum. And I personally am not willing to give up that forum.
So Bob, just to be clear, I'm looking at page 25 of the staff presentation, which included the changes to the permit procedures.
Right.
And includes, under design review, 2 new exceptions, one for accessory structures not visible from public roadways, and the second one, detached accessory structures less than 500 square feet located behind another building or on the rear half of the lot. Your suggestion relates to that proposed
correct.
exception.
If my understanding is correct, that the 1,000 square foot development will trigger an MBAR review. I think this is equally important because we don't have, we're not shoebox shaped lots. There's no way to really apply this in any kind of rational way in our community. And I do not think it's in the community interest to allow this language.
Okay. And Mr. Tuttle, I recall during the staff explanation that you pointed to the first of these bullets, accessory structures not visible from public roadways. Did you say that kind of an exception would be subject to an appeal?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I clarified that exception was limited to applying only in the purview of the North County Board of Architectural Review because they have,
Right.
their authority is a little different. And so it was a clarification to their provisions, so it would not.
Doesn't apply to Montecito.
Doesn't apply to Montecito.
All right, so
or
the only
coastal
one,
zone.
Bob, we're talking about is the second bullet, which would exempt from design review the detached accessory structures less than 500 square feet located behind another building. That's the focus of your suggestion, right?
You're saying the accessory structure is not visible from public roadways?
That only applies,
To
according
North
to what,
County.
to only to North County.
So the only thing that applies to Montecito is that second.
Is that correct, Mr. Tuttle? Okay.
Could we have clarification about the lower limit of this? If I go buy a tough shed at Home Depot, there's a size at which there's no permitting or review required. So I'm trying to define with no pun intended, the size of the box of 500 down to something.
Correct, Commissioner Miller, through the chair. Accessory structures like a garden shed that are less than 120 square feet and no taller than 12 feet in height, with no utilities essentially. So a tough shed from Home Depot, less than 120, that's exempt from any type of permit. So design review, planning permit, building permit is just exempt. So yeah, I guess the box we're talking about is from the 120 to 500 square foot, plus the fact that it would have, most of these structures would have utilities or electricity, something that would allow them to be occupied.
Okay.
All right. And if I may ask Mr. Tuttle, does staff have any sense of how many small projects like this will no longer need design review? How many, and that's a bad way to ask the question, but I think you know what I'm driving at. I'm trying to
Sure.
see what this accomplishes in terms of efficiency.
Actually, before you answer that question, just the ADU law has triggered a plethora of small-scale projects. If this becomes a non-reviewable project, I can't even imagine that it's going to be a field day for people to just stack up structures on their property. I mean, there are limits that we have in terms of lot coverage and the formula that's been applied. But I think once we take out the guideline that says it has to provide a certain amount of amenity to it, your neighbors, it has to provide a certain architectural quality to it. I mean, it's kind of what makes our neighborhood what it is. And I would hazard to say that you will have many more projects once there is an unbridled review process.
So, Mr. Tuttle, any sense about,
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I mean, it's hard to say. You certainly, countywide, we see a lot of small accessory structures, a little cabana, rec room, studio, things of that nature. I will clarify that under current provisions, those would still require a permit.
building permit?
Or even a zoning permit, like a land use permit or coastal development permit. It's just they wouldn't be subject to design review.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be a complete free-for-all. It would just take the design aspect out of the equation.
But my argument to you would be an 18 by 30 foot long building on a half-acre lot, clustered in a whole group of half-acre lots, isn't such a small project.
Well,
Commissioner Kubiak, is there a number that you would be comfortable with? Like, I'm just,
I'm comfortable with the law the way it is now.
so like 120 square feet?
120 square feet, you're doing what you want to do, but once you go beyond 120 square feet and you're bringing utilities and plumbing and electrical, and this building has a use, those buildings should be reviewed.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you want to have review in order to ensure that any impacts on other people are reviewed and considered? Or is it that every project of less than 500 square feet should be reviewed no matter whether it has external impacts or not?
I think they should be reviewed. I think it's a quality issue. It's both impact and it's, as I said, having sat for several years on MBAR before I came to the Planning Commission, I know with certainty that those projects that come before MBAR go out the door better projects. 90% of them get commentary from the board of architects that are there that are accepted by the applicant readily to improve their projects. And we just wind up with better buildings. I think I personally, I think it's foolish to give that up.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, if I could just clarify one further thing, which is that if someone is proposing, say, a new house, and then some smaller detached accessory structures in that category, those would then get pulled into because once you're in design review, you're kind of in for the whole of the project. It's not as if, unlike ADUs where the BAR kind of has to put blinders on and not.
We've had some very strange projects
and
like
not
that.
comment or review on the ADU. In this instance, if a project is already in because of some other trigger, those accessory structures would get pulled in with that. Don't know that addresses the concern, but just wanted to clarify that.
What happens if somebody builds a 450 square foot accessory structure today, and then after construction is finished, a month later, they start to build another 450 square foot accessory structure?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, in Montecito, there is a limit as to how many detached accessory structures you can have, both from, I think, a number standpoint, as well as square footage, like per lot coverage standpoint. So you can't just have a bunch of unlimited supply of detached accessory structures. Outside of Montecito, it's a little different. Really, it only comes into play is if you're in the rear setback and trying to construct accessory structures in the rear setback, you're limited to no more than 30 or 40% of the rear setback area. But yeah, Montecito is somewhat unique in that there's a limit to how many detached accessory structures you can have.
Okay.
Is that applicable to my notional tough shed that I'm kind of discussing? Like, it's my chicken coop and my tool shed? Like, is that a...
No. But even with a tough shed or things that would be exempt, they still have to meet like setback requirements and height limits and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So that tends to sort of put some constraints on.
I think it does fall into the square footage lot coverage issue, though. I don't know of how many structures you're allowed to build, but I know that there's a formula that says for a certain size lot, you can only cover that lot with so much built construction.
That is true. It's just that with something like a tough shed, we would never see it.
There. That's right. You would never see it. Which there's much of construction in Montecito that is unpermitted and that we never see.
Well, and that's really my concern. That's one of my concerns, is that if you require people who want to build a 400 square foot man cave or she shed in the backyard to go through design review, are you in fact encouraging people to do it without bothering to go to the county for a permit and just go and do it? Is it, at what point does the permitting requirement encourage people to just avoid the permitting process?
If in fact the man cave that someone built didn't impede their neighbor in any way, you might never hear about it.
Right.
However, if it did,
You might,
the county would require them to tear it down.
or get a permit for
There
it,
would be an appeal.
get an as-built permit for it. You
Sure.
could do that too.
You could do that too.
Okay. Would it be enough to require someone who's building under 500 square feet to provide notice, to put up a placard and to send a letter to the people within 300 feet saying, I'm going to do this? And that there is then the need for design review if somebody, a neighbor, or somebody else asked for it. Would that satisfy the suggestion you make to provide review for it, rather than reviewing every building that somebody wants to build under 500 square feet, whether it offends anybody or upsets anybody or not? Why not just try to figure out which ones are roiling the water and put that one through design review?
At least for me, my answer to that is only because I understand what the landscape of Montecito looks like in terms of its geometry. I really don't think that it's a wise decision. We have, like I said, we have so many small, non-conforming lots that have been around for 100 years. And they are wildly in different shapes. And it's really, I know, it's hard to stick a 500 square foot building on one of those lots. And there are many of them in that coastal zone without impacting someone else.
I know, but if it is, my
No,
suggestion
but
is
the
if
question
it,
is the quality of that building and gets better
no, but,
by
but
having discussion.
what you said in your last sentence was you can't do that without causing an impact on somebody else. And what I'm suggesting is that we separate the impact-causing projects from the ones that don't cause an
But
impact.
if you can't see what it is,
Yeah.
then it's very complicated. Because people will build very strange things. Some are not nice, are not compatible. Neighborhood compatibility is one of the things that gets reviewed at MBAR. Is it right? Does it fit?
Yeah. Okay.
Just
Commissioner
along
Kern.
those lines, I have a question that would be, if there's coverage issues and rules about how much of the property can be covered, and it's under 400 square feet, and you give the notice to the neighbor, and they're objecting, and it's not related to coverage of the property, it's objecting to the aesthetics, it seems that it would be reasonable to let that objected property go to MBAR, but not every property. The way I'm looking at this and listening to these two sides. Just that's my opinion. And I know that's not yours, but I
It's not
wanted to
mine.
share my opinion.
And just to follow up on that, projects to get permits need a builder and usually an architect
They do
to,
not in California.
oh, you don't have to have one, but,
You have the right to file as an owner.
right. I
And
just,
by the
I,
way, and by the time, at the time that that project's being developed,
mhm.
there may be no builder. There may be no one except the owner, or the owner and maybe, well, I don't want to say unqualified help, but there's sure a lot of stuff that goes on.
Well, they
You know,
still
I
have
got to
to-
tell you, I just feel like my job in many ways, both as a commissioner and as an architect, is that I'm part of the ugly police. We're here to make sure that nothing ugly happens, because ugly is bad. Ugly detracts from everyone in the community. And I think that it's going to be hard to hide all these structures. You know, I think this language about putting it behind the house isn't relevant to the shape of Montecito, so I discard that. But I know what my job is, and I know that in the long run, it's the right job.
So if it's the ugly police, then to me, it's a question of visibility. And if you can't see it, if it is truly a 450 square foot building that is hidden from all views of all neighbors, what's the need to go through design review? Yeah, maybe it ends up
You
ugly.
would probably be right on that, but I think you're talking about properties that don't exist in Montecito.
Well, but if you have to send notice to all the neighbors, everybody who could potentially see into that yard, and one of them says, look, my second story bedroom window looks directly into that yard, I'm going to see the ugly. And I'm going to insist on design review. I'm going to insist that the MBAR take a look at this and avoid the ugly. That's what I have a right to do that because you sent me this notice and I'm going to insist on it. That to me addresses with some precision the point you're making, which I think is a good one, without going more broadly than necessary to require every project under 500 square feet to go through design review, even where it's not going to do anybody any good. That's the reason I'm looking at this sort of middle ground to see if we can formulate a different kind of
I
policy.
can only tell you that I think in America, we've given up so much middle ground that we have communities that look like strip malls. We have buildings that make absolutely no sense. We have buildings that get built that make no environmental sense or are not, they're not done in ways that, you know, are sustainable. And I think all of those measures get kind of discussed in a review process. So for me, I'm kind of a staunch advocate that this is how our community has worked for the longest time, and I think that it's one of the reasons why Montecito is what Montecito is.
Okay.
I suggest we straw poll this question.
Can you what?
Straw poll, like just kind of take a survey of, of.
And then move on to some of the other.
Well,
I think maybe
if this is a split 2-2 vote, we might, excuse me,
Well, it's the
excuse me,
only-
Mr. Chair, I
It's
didn't.
the only issue within the matrix of what's being proposed that's a
Understood.
sore
Okay.
subject.
So, straw poll. I think you know where Bob stands. I think you have a sense of where I'm coming from.
But everybody should state for the record their position.
Yeah, because then we'll put a motion on the floor and try to adopt it.
And I have to go first.
You don't have to. I could make him go first if you like.
I feel like Bob went first.
I think I'm pretty clear.
Go ahead.
Okay, so go first and state your position. So
I
it's-
would strike this language, and I think the review of projects within Montecito should remain as it is now.
Hey, Chair and Commissioners, just so I can track, or staff can track what we're talking about. So there's two codes that we're updating, the coastal zone and the MLUDC. So is the topic that's on your question right now, for Commissioner Kupiak, are you saying strike it in both the MLUDC and in the coastal zone?
Well, half of Montecito's hedgerow is in the coastal zone.
I understood his proposal to be to strike this new exemption from both codes.
Okay. So if that's what the straw poll is, then I think that's helpful for everybody to understand what they're
Right, right,
reacting to.
right.
This is a tough one, but I do feel that there are other measures that could be useful in helping the ugly factor. And I'm not opposed to the language as it is. I would be open to a compromise, though, such as mentioned by Mr. Americander.
Okay. Marshall?
I like Mr. Americano's, Chair Americano's language about public notice and appeal. I would also be open to a adjustment on the square footage number. I think this is a scope thing. I think that 120 feet and below, like, tough sheds are inherently ugly, and they happen. And so all we're talking about is really a question of, like, where does the ugly line draw? And I'm prepared to move it, but I'm at some point I am in favor of ugly sheds to put your tools in, or fill in the blank, accessory drive.
I think what Mr. Tuttle said was that a shed of 120 feet or smaller that's pre-built, that doesn't have plumbing, doesn't have other kinds of features that trigger a permit, don't even require a permit, let alone any design review. Am I right about that?
That's correct.
I guess what I'm speaking metaphorically in a way that's not helpful. What I'm saying is that I am okay with an accessory structure that is that is above the 120 number, but is still in the potentially ugly category. But I am very open to kind of where that threshold would be. If it was 200 square feet, that wouldn't bother me. If it was 250, and so what I'm trying to lay out is that if Mr. Kubiak is hunting for my vote, one way to do it might be to, like, lower the number, and go with a subject to appeal, to then trigger MBAR review.
I don't know what that number is. What's the number? I mean, it's kind of, it's just, when you start to build a structure like that, is it 300 square feet? Is it 10 by 30? Is it, you know, I mean, I'm just trying to imagine in my own mind as an architect, what's the size of that block that we're going to build? And when does that block get large enough that it's meaningful?
What I like about what I think the origin of the 120 number is that there is a size above which, like, there is some kind of building concern of, like, if it falls down in an earthquake or something, and that my tough shed from Home Depot is not engineered to go bigger than blank for structural engineering reasons. And so I appreciate why that exists. I'm not sure that in my mind is the same thing as the ugly bar. Like, I'm comfortable with an ugly but architecturally sound segment. If you have a,
You and I will have some bitter arguments.
well, indeed we will. So, but if there was a compromise position where, like, let's not say it's 500, let's say it's 300, because that is 40% smaller than the number currently, you would have me.
Well, I think what Commissioner Kubiak is saying is that it's not a number issue, that a 300 square foot ugly building is a 300 square foot ugly building, and
That's 15 by 20.
it needs review. So I think we need to see if we can come to a resolution on this. I'm going to put on the floor a motion that the language on page 25, reading detached accessory structures less than 500 square feet located behind another building on the other half of a lot, that added to that language would be a requirement that any such building be preceded with notice, written notice to the neighbors, and no request for design review. And I don't have the exact language, but I'm sure staff will come up with it. So that this exception will not apply where there is a request for design review by a neighbor or someone else. Does that, as a concept, pose any big problems with the staff before I ask for comments from the commission?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I mean, we can certainly make that work. It does introduce a new process. And, you know, one of our overarching efforts with this package is to streamline and simplify our processes as opposed to making them more complicated. And I would argue that this would make it more complicated because we're having to track the notices and make sure we're receiving or not receiving requests, and within what period of time would that occur. And many times a project's design review might often occur prior to someone submitting for a permit application. So at what point in the process would this occur? Often our notices don't happen until kind of midway through a project, and so prior to approval, and so the timing of when we would need to do this noticing, it creates a lot of extra steps that to a process that are already numerous, and we're endeavoring to simplify and streamline. So
But if design review is required, you have to notice.
you have to notice, and that happens pretty early on in the process. But if it's not required, then as a default, and then trying to determine, introduce this new sort of waiver process or request process, I'm a little concerned that it would become difficult to implement.
And it may be as burdensome to the applicant as having to go through.
Having to go through design review anyway. So, can I, one thing I think it's worth mentioning, and you might recall this from when we did the study session or workshop the other week, we're in phase 2 of a 3-phase effort with this current package. Phase 3, per the board's direction, is to identify more projects that can be processed in a ministerial fashion. So identifying truly ministerial type permits. So for example, go to the city of Santa Barbara, you're putting in a single-story addition to your house, you're obtaining a building permit. There's no separate planning approval outside the coastal zone. So we are going to be, as part of that phase 3 effort, looking at sort of a box or a suite of projects that would be appropriate to process more ministerially. That would include design review, because design review is inherently subjective. And so we will be tackling this sort of big conversation again as part of phase 3. So if you're struggling with this 500 square foot accessory structure exemption now, one option would be to kick the can down the road and tackle it as part of that larger discussion about ministerial permitting and streamlining. So that's one option, and I would probably recommend that over coming up with this sort of new noticing process.
Yeah, coming up with new policy on the floor of the commission is the undesirable way of going about things. Because what strikes us as a good idea sitting up here turns out to be maybe not such a good idea. So I can live with that as a solution. In other words, take this exemption out of this ordinance, kick it down the road, and have a more robust discussion about ways in which design review can be narrowed to those projects that truly need it, and maybe make it a broader discussion. And I can live with that as a temporary solution.
You know, I mean, and just as a suggestion, is this, we start looking for how to do ministerial approvals for a 500 square foot building, you might limit that to conforming lots, not a non-conforming lot. If the lot's 2 acres, then somebody's got a real shot at having a front and a back and the space to put things, but it would not apply to non-conforming lots.
Yeah.
Does kicking
I like kicking the can down the road. 'Cause
satisfy you for today?
for today,
And
That's-
then we see what the next ordinance review is.
I think as long as there's language in the minutes that they understand why we are potentially objecting to this.
Mr. Chair, or Commissioner Kupiec through the chair. So I think what would happen is this would be worked into your motion where you'd be recommending, as part of your recommendation to the Board of Supervisors and kind of through the County Planning Commission to the Board of Supervisors, that this exemption be removed. So that would be just part of your recommendation to the board. County Planning Commission might have a different recommendation that they forward to the board, and then ultimately the board will make the call.
Absolutely. No, I think we understand that.
Well, without going to the hearing, I mean, I think that the language that says there's a particular problem here. Problem is, half of these small, tiny lots exist in the coastal zone. The coastal zone extends, about 1,000 feet from the beach. I know it's an irregular line in Montecito, but a very large portion of lower Montecito in the hedgerow exists in the coastal zone. It's a problem. It's a problem trying to wedge stuff in that's this size on tiny lots. I would like them to understand that as being the substance of our conversation.
All right, Bob, can we treat your suggestion as a motion? A motion to delete this language from page 25 and to have an explanation with that recommendation along the lines of what you've just described.
So Chair and Commissioners, just to help navigate this, before we do that, it'd be good if there are any other issues in question on the proposed ordinance amendments, because if there's not, then we could work with staff and with you as just amending the motion to carve this out as a recommendation. So if the commission's willing or wants or desires, sorry, I threw all kinds of different options out there. If the commission desires to accept all the other changes except for this one that we're talking about, then we can modify the motion so that way the motion maker could say, recommend the county PC, recommend the board with this revision today or with this recommendation to the PC and the board. So if we could just get, I guess what I'm trying to say in a really long roundabout way is if we can get a read, if there are any other changes before we take any motions.
Marshall?
I have 2 changes I'd like to.
All right, he's got 2, I've got 2. Do you have any? No. Okay. So we do have other changes that we're going to talk about. Would you rather we dealt with each proposal separately or try to bundle them all together, which may be tough to accomplish?
So Chair and Commissioners, I think it would be good as we work through this is to work through each of the issues.
Yeah.
And then have an understanding from the majority of the commission on where they stand on each of those points. And then at the end, then we can know what that ultimate recommendation may be.
Good. Okay. So let's, if for the moment at least, table your motion, all right? Or table your suggestion. It's not actually in the form of a motion. We'll just put that aside for the moment. And let's have the other recommendations. Marshall, what do you have in mind?
My 2 are, one is I would want to give the applicant the ability to appeal a permit extension that has been denied. I track staff's logic that outsiders who have been fighting for a permit in terms of construction, having another bite at the apple on a permit approval, why we would deny that. But that I think that if there is a scenario in which, and director and staff may have good reasons for trying to not extend a permit, offer a permit extension, if that's being denied, that there is a path to appeal by the applicant. So that would be issue number 1.
Okay, wait, before you go on, let's just get staff's view of that Can you tell us what page we're talking about?
I'm sorry, that was page.
27, permit expirations and time extensions.
The issue was also captured on page 31. Is that my understanding is that all of these scenarios were appealable to the Planning Commission, but the time extensions. And staff offered the thoughtful remark that the appeal of a time extension by outside parties is oftentimes an abusive tactic just to kind of fight about the underlying merits of the project, not the merits of the extension. And I buy that logic completely. But if the director has made the decision, and maybe not Director Plowman, but some future less thoughtful director makes the decision to deny an extension, would that be appealable by the applicant to the Planning Commission?
Right,
That-
so I'm looking at page 31, and the 4th item down on that page called time extensions of permits and approvals. You see that?
Yes,
And they're proposing that the director could grant time extensions.
yes.
And you're suggesting that this be revised to include the ability of either the applicant or anybody else to appeal that decision?
So my understanding is of these 5 items on this list,
Yeah.
4 of them are subject to appeal to the Planning Commission,
Is that true?
even though it doesn't say that.
Yes.
Yeah, which 4?
Everything that isn't the time extension.
Okay, time extensions are not, the decision on a time extension is not appealable?
As currently drafted, decisions on time extensions would not be appealable.
Okay.
So I think Commissioner Miller is suggesting that approvals not be appealable, but denials could be appealed by an applicant.
Is that what you're suggesting?
That is exactly what I'm suggesting.
And, I mean, staff doesn't have any issue with that, probably will come up.
Right.
But don't have any concerns with carving that out.
Okay, so this would be appealable by the applicant if a denial, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Can we stop and just discuss that and see if there's?
Sure.
Okay. Any objection to that one? No. No objection, no objection. Okay. So that's a yes. We'll include that. What's your second proposal?
My second proposal is government bureaucracy at its worst. ADUs as being appealable locally versus only through the Coastal Commission. I want to laud staff on the idea that there should only be an appeal through a useful mechanism in that function, meaning that the only real overturning of that would ever happen would be at the Coastal Commission stage, not at a local planning commission level. That said, I feel myself as a second order elected as an appointed public servant. I have listened to too many Montecito residents complain to me bitterly about the lack of appealability of ADUs. And so I am uninclined to cast a vote that would narrow appeal options while fully acknowledging staff's comments that these appeals are largely useless.
Okay, let's go back to the text. What page is this on? Maybe staff can help.
That would be page 26.
Thank you. Coastal Development Permit, CDPs. Proposed, process CDPs for non-appealable development ministerially, accessory dwelling units. All right, you see where we are?
I do, yes.
And are you suggesting that that accessory dwelling units, that a decision be appealable?
So currently, if I understand this correctly, is that accessory dwelling units are appealable within the county planning, like to a county planning commission in the coastal zone, even though the chance of that appeal achieving anything productive is de minimis? Is that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mr. Tuttle.
No, Commissioner Miller, through the chair, I think that's accurate. Yeah, currently, ADUs in the coastal zone are appealable in all situations. Inland, they are not. And yeah, as I mentioned, they are largely unfruitful because either a project meets the standards or it doesn't. There's really no discretion.
And are you suggesting they no longer be appealable?
No, this is, the proposal is to make them no longer appealable.
And you think that should be changed?
I think we should leave it in its current language, while fully that they are appealable, while fully acknowledging Mr. Tuttle's remark that these appeals don't have much purpose in terms of they have to meet objective design, measurement standards or whatnot. It's a fight about, is it taller than 12 feet kind of thing, not is it pretty or not. Is that a fair understanding of what an ADU appeal would be?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, essentially, I mean, I think the current language in the code is that to file an appeal of an ADU, you have to make an argument as to why that ADU does not comply with standards of the code.
And so it's largely non-discretionary in terms of
It is largely
appealable.
non-discretionary, but we have seen plenty of them.
And so the point is that at the ministerial level, non-discretionary decisions can largely happen. So what I'm trying to say is I appreciate logically why we would be why staff is recommending the elimination of an appeal that is really only not over non-discretionary matters. That said, you may have heard in my folksy way, how this subject comes up all the time at coffee shops, that as I am out and about in the community talking to people and they know I am a planning commissioner, I hear with great repetition, I am so frustrated I can't appeal ADUs. And so today we would be casting a vote to eliminate an appeal in the coastal zone of ADUs. And I feel uncomfortable casting that vote given my responsibility to represent the voices in the community, even if what is being achieved in these appeals is not all that functional. So does that make sense?
Understood.
Okay.
Staff?
Chair and Commissioners, I understand what Commissioner Miller is and just trying to move this ball down the court a little bit. There's already a disconnect because in inland, they're not appealable. So really this motion or this action is to align the process both inland and coastal. So that way those residents that are in the coastal zone and inland have the same process. So really what the current code is allows an appeal process that is an exercise of futility in either they meet or they don't meet. So for the commission's decision process, all this is doing is aligning a process between the inland MLUDC and the coastal zone. And it matches the rest of the county as well as far as state law requiring these things to be ministerial. So we have some shot clocks we have to meet, so the appeal process delays that and just puts the county at greater risk in trying to meet state mandated shot clocks on approving ADUs.
Okay. Other comments? Bob?
I mean, it's state law. I mean, the
The
appeal
ADU.
process for an ADU is ineffectual.
Well, it's ineffectual because it doesn't work to stop the ADU from being built. It just slows it down.
If you
Okay.
live on one side of Schoolhouse Road, you're in the game. If you live on the other side of Schoolhouse Road, you're not in the game.
Okay.
I don't know.
No comment?
Okay. I'm inclined, Marshall, to think that rather than accede to unrealistic and ultimately frustrating sentiments from people who would like to appeal but can't, I think we need to face reality. And the reality is an appeal may be available in theory, but not as a practical matter, because these projects either satisfy the standards and don't, or don't. There's no discretion to be exercised. There's nothing to be achieved by an appeal. And I think we have a job as commissioners to deal with reality as it is. And I understand the coffee shop discomfort and the desire not to have people get in your face when you're trying to just enjoy that coffee. But as policymakers, just seems to me we should do that which is consistent with reality. And reality is these appeals are doomed. So allowing them to continue doomed strikes me as not a great solution for us to pursue. So I'm going to have trouble supporting it. And I think I heard Bob say that too.
Well, it penalizes somebody. So if the appeal is allowed, then you're penalizing the person who's actually trying to build an ADU.
With a delay that is going to achieve
Cost them
nothing
money.
ultimately. So-
100%. And I, in my earlier comments during the presentation, I acknowledged I am someone who has built an ADU in the coastal zone, and it was not appealed. So my own preferences on this issue, I'm very clear on.
You escaped the dragon.
It
here.
is that my understanding, and so yes, no, I did, and that's so. What my personal thoughts on this are. This makes all the sense in the world to change.
Yeah.
My concern is that state law does not specifically prohibit this appeal as structured in the coastal zone. The law for the inland in the inland area is different than it is for the coastal zone, and we do have discretion to allow these appeals to continue forward.
Yeah.
And the number of people who I am not comfortable casting in my job of not necessarily expressing my own personal preferences and what I think makes sense, but in representing the voice of the community, I feel very called upon that narrowing the grounds of appealability of ADUs is not a vote I can take. And so,
Understood.
yeah.
Okay.
I think it's time for a new coffee shop.
I'm speaking it comes up at coffee shops. It is not that I am afraid of confronting constituents on these things. This is an affirmative vote to change a policy, and it will not be well received.
So we have a time constraint here that I need to be out by 12:35. So we have about 20 minutes left before we run out of time here. So I'm gonna suggest that I think there are not 3 votes right now for your suggestion. You've presented it well and articulately, but I don't think that there are 3 votes for that right now. Do you have? Let me ask Commissioner Kern. Do you have any other suggestions to make before I jump into my 2?
No.
Okay. I would like the Planning Commission to be able to extend permits beyond the one-time extension allowed by the director for 2 years upon application.
Is that page 27?
That's on page 27, thank you. Yes. I think broadening the Planning Commission's authority here can avoid problems down the road with a project that can't get started for whatever reason it may be. And having discretion to say yes or no leaves all the issues on the table for that commission to decide when the application for an extension comes up. So I would propose that and request comments from my colleagues here on that subject. Bob?
I'm fine with that.
There's one. Marshall?
I'd be interested in understanding how that differs from my first ask.
That's allowing that's allowing the applicant to pursue an extension appeal from a denial by the director. I'm suggesting that in addition to the director's authority to grant a one-time extension of 2 years, that the Planning Commission have the authority to grant an additional extension of time upon application by the applicant for more time. So that if the applicant, after 4 years, can't build and doesn't think another 2-year extension from the director is going to be enough to do it, that the applicant can submit an application to the county, ask the County Planning Commission to give him 4 years,
Yes.
a 4-year extension, which this extension rules would not allow. I'm suggesting a revision and a broadening of the Planning Commission's role and authority to grant an additional extension. It's consistent with what you suggested, but goes beyond it.
So I guess the distinction between like they would not be able to grant it versus the director saying, I can't approve this, so I'm denying it. So then it's just, as a functional matter, I'm not sure there's much difference between what you're asking for and what I'm asking for. And if we can mush them into one statement to make life easier, I would be all in favor of it.
And if we can do that, fine. Otherwise, two different rules, but you're okay with it.
The concept of it, absolutely. I don't want there to be two
okay with it, too?
competing.
All right, so we have 4 votes for that
Languages.
idea. Everybody clear on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, just to say what I think you're saying so that we understand it correctly. Right now, say we'll just take a CDP as currently proposed, it would be valid for 4 years. The director may grant a 2-year time extension, so that would bring it to 6 years. And as currently drafted, that would be the end of it. Your request is to add an additional time extension opportunity beyond that 6-year time frame, where at the request of an applicant, the Planning Commission could grant an additional time extension beyond what's already been provided.
Exactly.
Would there be an upper limit as to how many? So currently in our code, we have limits as to how long of a time extension can be granted. Would you propose a limit on how long of a time extension to be granted?
No.
Because without any limit, things tend to get pretty stale after a certain period of time.
In which case, staleness will be a reason for the commission to say no. I trust the people on the commission to look at the facts on the ground and decide whether or not an extension of time is going to be a good idea or a bad idea, rather than trying to decide in advance. We don't trust you 6 years down the road to make a good decision, so we're going to say you can't. I think if you're going to give a commission authority, give them authority and trust that the people you put on there will consider all the relevant factors in deciding whether an extension of time is warranted.
Okay. I think what we would do is have, so I think under our current code, there's findings that have to be made for granting an extension. So we would resuscitate those findings.
Great.
That the commission would be considering in the context of a request.
I have no problem with findings.
I would be okay with a extension of a year or 2 years, but with no cap on the number of times that can be applied for. So if you come in, the commission is not going to be handing out 10-year extensions in one.
I'm not worried about a commission going crazy with this sort of thing.
Okay.
I really think we can trust the people who get appointed to these two commissions not to do something that's truly unwarranted, particularly if you have to make findings.
I think you were just far more logical than I. I'm not sure I trust myself with some of the powers you're describing.
We're talking about people trusting us, so I think we can trust somebody else. One more. So I think we had 4 votes for that one. Mr. Tuttle, right? And now I've lost my other idea. Oh, here it is. Development plan approval. I'm sorry, page 31. The second item down, development plan approval, third column, proposed. Director approval for structures and additions less than 1,000 square feet. I would make that 2,000 square feet. I would broaden the director's authority in an effort to try and take some of these small items off of commission agendas. So I would just go from 1,000 to 2,000 feet. We're on page 31, right, Bob? Yeah. 31.
I'm not opposed.
Not opposed. Marshall, you okay with that?
I remain a little vague as to what falls in this category. I'm not opposed on it. I could be made opposed if
Commissioner Miller.
Commissioner Kubiak has strong opinions.
It's not germane to Montecito.
No, Commissioner Miller, through the chair, let me give a couple examples. So right now in the Resource Management Zone District in Montecito, which is some of those kind of upper parts of Montecito up in the foothills, within that zone district, any development requires a development plan. and that development plan requires commission approval. So as proposed, as drafted, if someone were to already have a house and they just wanted to do a small addition, they would not have to go back to the planning commission for that. If it's within 1,000 square feet, the director could approve, could take action on that request. Commissioner or Chair Mayor Connor is suggesting that be bumped up to 2,000 square feet. The other scenario where development plan is triggered is based on a floor area. So in all zones within Montecito, or all residential zones in Montecito, if you have more than 20,000 square feet of cumulative development, you get bumped into a development plan level of review because of just the totality of development you're proposing sort of triggers a desire to have more discretion and public review. So again, say you're at 19,000 square feet and you want to put in a 1,000 square foot addition to your house or an accessory structure or what have you. For that 1,000 square feet, you wouldn't have to come to the planning commission. It could be director level approval. So it doesn't change the threshold. It just downshifts the decision-making authority from PC to director and still allows for appeals. So if someone had objection to it, it could still end up back in your hands.
It still goes to MBAR.
And this isn't
Still
a
goes
design
to
review issue, so
That's
we're not talking about exempting those
Yeah.
from design review. We're changing what would be subject to design review.
Yeah, it just avoids going to planning commission, which is a little considerably more complicated. So Bob, you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
All right, okay.
I'm fine with it.
All right, 4. So we're at 12:25, and we've touched on, I think, all the issues that people wanted to raise. Let me ask one process question. When is this set of recommendations going to the Board of Supervisors, or to the Planning Commission for that matter?
Mr. Chair, it's set to go to the County Planning Commission on October 29th. For
Okay.
the Board of Supervisors, we're currently aiming to get it before the end of the year. We're looking at December 16th,
Okay.
if
but-
possible.
But we can't bring the language back to this board until mid-November. So we'd miss have you got enough direction to be able to put together a communication from us to the to the Planning Commission with our recommendations?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I think we do. Some of this is just kind of removing something that had been stricken out or
Yep.
putting back in something that had been removed. So that's a pretty straightforward change. And like the 2,000 square foot bump, the
Yep.
removal of the exemption for 500 square foot accessory structures. I think we have enough to go off for applicant appeals of denial of time extensions, and then inserting a provision for time extensions, an additional opportunity for time extensions by the Planning Commission upon applicant request with no time limit.
I'm happy to remove the appeal of denials if the other one covers it. I feel like those are two.
I think they don't.
They don't.
I think they're
Okay.
different.
They are different.
Here's my question. Do you need a motion and a vote to make this formal? We've done this somewhat informally up here.
So, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, yes, we do need a motion, and I'm just going to try to recap what we just
Thank you.
went through. I think we have a majority on 3 of the items, and I'm going to go over those real quick. So it appears that we have a majority of support on the denial of an extension being appealed by the applicant to the commission. We have majority consensus on the extension allowing the commission to be able to grant extensions beyond the director's one-time extension. And we have consensus on the development plan approval limit being raised to 2,000 square feet.
Right.
So those, I think we have consensus on those. So then that would be one motion where the motion maker could say, recommend to the Planning Commission all these except for the 3 things I talked about, which is denial of extensions, the extension beyond the directors, and then development plan approval at 2,000 square feet. Now, the two areas that we don't have consensus, we may want to take as separate motions if the member of the commission wants to have an opposing vote. And that one would be allowing appeals or removing the recommendation to strike appeals of coastal development permits for ADUs. So that's one where there's an opposing vote. And so we might want to take that one separately. And then the other one is, in this one, or maybe we have a compromise, which is the exemptions for design review under 500 square feet. I think there was consensus on just striking that. And if we do have consensus by striking that language, then we could add that to the overall motion.
So I'm going to suggest that the following motion, that the motion is to approve the recommendations of staff with respect to the package of material and the ordinances and the findings that are included in the staff recommendation with 4 changes. And the 4 changes are those just read by Mr. Wilson, including the recommendation to remove the proposal to eliminate design review for buildings under 500 square feet with those 4 changes. So that's my motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. Is there discussion on,
So just to clarify, that does not include the denial or the appeals for a coastal development permit.
right?
We're going to take that
We're gonna
separate.
deal with that one
Okay.
separately. Okay, good. Motion second, is there discussion? All right. Roll call, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, but
Doesn't matter. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's unanimously approved. All right. That takes care of, that's bundled up properly, right? Okay. And then, why don't you describe the last issue as you have it?
okay, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, the last motion would be in regards to striking the recommendation to not have appeals for ADUs in the coastal zone.
All right. Do you want to pursue that one? This was your coffee shop problem.
Yes, so I mean, I would make a motion to remove that language from the recommendation package.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay. There's no second, so
The motion fails.
the motion fails for lack of a second.
So now we need to go back and include it in the first motion.
No,
So-
we don't.
No.
No.
Okay.
There's no change.
Well, the motion was not seconded, so just to clarify, I believe that means it won't be reflected in your minutes.
Right. Yeah, I think you understood that.
I do.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other business that we should be considering before we adjourn? Hearing nothing.
So, Chair, I think just for the record, I do think we should have a motion to just clarify that that recommendation for ADUs to not be appealed to be part of this recommendation package.
No, I think he's right. I think that it does, the recommendation from the staff package includes
So
Not
Chair,
having-
so Chair and Commissioners, the
removing
question
appeals.
the question I posed before the motion was, did you exclude the ADU? And the response was yes. So I think we should, for the record, just to belt and suspenders, just make a motion and make sure it's included.
Okay, I make a motion to make sure we include, because I'm your guy, make a motion to include the exemption of ADUs in the coastal zone from review, as reflected in the recommendation package. That is my motion.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Okay. All right. Now, is there any other business that we should consider? Mr. Secretary, do we have anything else on the agenda? No? All right. I think we have adjourned just almost in time. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody. This has been a very productive meeting, and thank you in particular to the staff for bearing with us during all of this. And we're adjourned, and we'll see you next month.